Order, order. This is a public evidence session of the House of Commons Committee of Privileges. The Privileges Committee's purpose in this inquiry is to decide whether or not Mr. Johnson misled the House of Commons, whether or not he committed a contempt of the House, and whether or not this was in any way intentional or reckless. This is what the House of Commons has required us to do by referring this matter to us in the motion which was carried without a vote against in April last year. Misleading the House might sound like a technical issue, but it is a matter of great importance. Our democracy is based on Parliament scrutinising legislation and holding the government to account for its actions. We proceed on the basis that what we are told by ministers is accurate. Parliament expects proactive candour and transparency. If what ministers tell us is not the truth, we can't do our job. Our democracy depends upon trust that what ministers tell MPs in the House of Commons is the truth. And without that trust, our entire parliamentary democracy is undermined. Everyone makes mistakes, and when ministers do, they're expected to correct it at the earliest opportunity, and that is what happens routinely. Inadvertent misleading, which is promptly corrected, is not an issue. The House understands if ministers decline to answer, for example, on matters which relate to national security or market sensitivity. But misleading intentionally or recklessly, or refusing to answer or failing to correct, impedes or frustrates the functioning of the House and is contempt. During the COVID pandemic, the government and Parliament imposed extensive restrictions on our freedom in the interests of protecting public health. In this inquiry, we are not looking at the rights or wrongs of those COVID rules or guidance, or repeating the partygate inquiry into the conduct of individual ministers and officials in number 10. What the House has mandated us to look at is whether Mr. Johnson told the truth to Parliament to the best of his knowledge about number 10's compliance with those COVID rules and guidance. It is about the truth, and that is why this inquiry goes to the heart of the trust on which our system of accountability depends. This committee is comprised of members of Parliament who have been appointed to this role by the House of Commons. The political balance on this committee reflects the political balance in the House, which is why the committee comprises 4 Conservatives and 3 opposition MPs, including 2 from Labour and 1 from the SNP. Having said that, we leave our party interests at the door of the committee room and conduct our work in the interests of the House. That is what we're doing in this inquiry and what we will continue to do. We are examining what Mr. Johnson said to the House about gatherings in number 10, whether what he said to the House was correct or not, whether, and if so, how quickly and comprehensively any misleading statement was corrected. If a statement was misleading, we will then consider whether that was a genuine error or if it was reckless or intentional, and whether the record was corrected in good time. We have already considered evidence supplied by the government, including emails, WhatsApp messages, and photos taken at the time, and written statements taken under oath from witnesses present at the relevant times, to inform us of what Mr. Johnson would have known at the time of his statements to the House. There has been much comment about whether the committee is relying on the Sue Gray report material. We are not relying on any such material, and nor will we. Last November, we decided to collect direct, first-hand evidence from all the witnesses under oath, and this has all been disclosed to Mr. Johnson. Sue Gray is not a witness. We have followed the standing orders of the House and the precedents as advised by our clerks, by Speaker's Counsel, and by Sir Ernest Ryder, a former Lord Justice of Appeal. We have not changed the rules or the procedure. That is not within our remit. They are laid down by the House, we are bound to follow them, and that is what we've done. In our report of the 3rd of March, we set out the main issues which we will be asking Mr Johnson about today. We'll be talking about rules and guidance, since Mr Johnson told the House Number 10 complied with both. When we refer to rules, we mean regulations laid down by the House which have the force of law and under which fixed penalty notices were issued. Guidance is guidance issued by the government. For example, when Mr Johnson was talking about hands, face, space, he was referring to the guidance on social distancing when he said space. On the basis of information that is in the public domain and evidence the committee has received, and in the context of what Mr Johnson said to the House of Commons, we will be establishing what rules and guidance relating to COVID were in force at the relevant time, Mr Johnson's knowledge of those rules and guidance, Mr Johnson's attendance at or knowledge of gatherings that were not socially distanced and those for which fixed penalty notices were issued. Mr Johnson spoke about the question of COVID compliance in Number 10 in the House of Commons more than 30 times, most particularly on the 1st of December 2021, the 8th of December 2021, and the 25th of May 2022. I'd like us all to have a reminder now of some of what Mr Johnson said in Parliament in answer to questions, starting, if we may, with a question from the Leader of the Opposition on the 1st of December.
As millions of people were locked down last year, was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely during Number 10. But I repeat, Mr Speaker, that I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that. But I repeat what I have said to him, that I have been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken.
The Prime Minister has been caught red-handed. Why doesn't he end the investigation right now by just admitting it?
Because, Mr Speaker, I've been repeatedly assured that no rules were broken.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times. And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance had been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules. But clearly this was not the case for some of those gatherings after I had left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building.
Thank you. We need to understand why Mr Johnson said to Parliament that no rules or guidance were broken in Number 10 when we have evidence that he knew what the rules and guidance were and that he was present at gatherings where those rules and guidance were breached. We have yet to reach our conclusions in this inquiry, and we will not do so until we have heard and considered Mr Johnson's evidence today. The evidence that we have already raises clear questions, and this is Mr Johnson's opportunity to give us his answers. Will the clerk to the committee please administer the oath?
Will you take the Bible and read out the terms of the oath?
Yes, I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give for this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Johnson, you provided the committee with a written submission which the committee has published. Do you confirm that the contents of that statement are true?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, please make your opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. If I can, before I begin, I'm conscious that we're all expected to vote in a few minutes. I think at 2:21. I hope you don't mind if I resume. I mean, it will break up what I'm about to say.
Well, we're a parliamentary committee and Parliament is continuing. If there is a vote called, which we do expect, I will suspend the sitting to enable members to vote and we can pick up from where we left off. But thanks for reminding everybody that that's what's going to be happening.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as you've just said, there were a number of days over a period of 20 months when gatherings took place in Downing Street that went past the point where they could be said to be necessary for work purposes. That was wrong. I bitterly regret it. I understand public anger and I continue to apologise for what happened on my watch, and I take full responsibility. But as you've just said, Chair, the purpose of this inquiry is not to reopen so-called partygate. It is to discover whether or not I lied to Parliament, wittingly misled colleagues and the country about what I knew and believed about those gatherings when I said that the rules and the guidance had been followed at number 10. I am here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time. When this inquiry was set up, I was completely confident that you would find nothing to show I knew or believed anything else, as indeed you have not. I was confident, not because there's been some kind of cover-up. I was confident because I knew that is what I believed, and that is why I said it. To understand why I believed it, you have to go back to a time before the Sue Gray report, before the police investigation, back to a time where, as the evidence before the committee shows, there was a near universal belief at number 10 that the rules and guidance were being complied with. That is the general belief that has been uncovered by your evidence, and it was that belief that governed what I said in the House. And as soon as it was clear that I was wrong, and as soon as the Sue Gray investigation and the Metropolitan Police investigation had concluded, I came to the House of Commons and I corrected the record as I promised I would. I clearly could not have anticipated the outcome by coming earlier because I genuinely did not know what the outcome would be and was deeply shocked when fines were issued, not least since I had been told on a couple of occasions at least by Sue Gray that she did not think the threshold of criminality had been reached. I believe that the committee's work helps to explain why I was so shocked. You've been investigating this for more than 10 months, and I thank you for what you have done. You have had access to a vast body of evidence. You have collected and reviewed hundreds of pages of transcripts of Sue Gray's interviews, and you have analysed many thousands of contemporary emails and WhatsApp messages and other material. You found nothing to show that I was warned in advance that events in number 10 were illegal, in fact nothing to show that anyone raised anxieties with me about any event, whether before or after it had taken place. If there had been such anxiety about a rule-breaking event at number 10, it would unquestionably have been escalated to me. We all knew how vital it was to maintain public confidence in the fight against COVID, that we should do what we were asking the public to do. There's only one exception, of course, and that's the testimony of Dominic Cummings, which is unsupported by any documentary evidence and which plainly cannot be relied upon. He has every motive to lie. Not only has the committee found nothing incriminating, it has gathered a huge amount of evidence which demonstrates very clearly that those working in Number 10 shared my belief that the rules and the guidance were being followed, and that I received assurances that there was no rule breaking at Number 10. The best and fairest course now would be for the committee to publish all the evidence it has assembled so that Parliament and public can judge for themselves. Despite my repeated requests, the committee has refused to do this. As investigator, prosecutor, judge and jury, it has elected only to publish the evidence which it considers incriminating and not the evidence which I rely on and which answers the charges. And despite assurances that we would be permitted to add material that we rely on into the core bundle published today, late last night we were told that the committee was not willing to publish a large number of extracts which I rely upon in my defence. That is manifestly unfair. Instead, and in the absence of any evidence that I deliberately misled Parliament, the committee is trying to mount an argument that I must have known that the guidance was not being followed, and that I buried in my head as we were fighting COVID was an unarticulated belief that even if we were following the rules, we were somehow failing to follow the guidance. And you have in your fourth report suggested that it must have been obvious to me because you have the photographs. So let me deal with this point head on, because it is nonsense. These photos have now been churned through the media for more than a year, and it seems to be the view of the committee and sadly many members of the public that they show me attending rule-breaking parties where no one was social distancing. They show nothing of the kind. They show me giving a few words of thanks at a work event for a departing colleague. They show me with my red box passing on the way to another meeting or heading back into my flat to carry on working often late into the night. They show a few people standing together as permitted by the guidance where full social distancing is not possible and where mitigating measures are taken. They show events which I was never fined for attending. I know the public will have had the impression that these were covert photos with their sinister pixelations that have been obtained by the media. The vast majority were in fact taken by the official Number 10 photographer. To say that we would have held illicit events in Number 10 while allowing these events to be immortalised by an official photographer is staggeringly implausible. There are a couple of photos where the event is captured on Zoom as well as by the official photographer, which only reinforces the point. If we had an event that we believed was illicit or unauthorised, why would we have it on Zoom when you never quite know who is on the other side? Most important of all, if it was obvious to me that these events were contrary to the guidance and the rules, then it must have been equally obvious to dozens of others, including the most senior officials in the country, all of them, like me, responsible for drawing up the rules. And it must have been obvious to others in the building, including the current Prime Minister.
Order, order. We will now suspend the sitting whilst the House of Commons votes, and we will reconvene in 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Session. Mr. Johnson, would you like to resume your opening statement?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And the committee will remember I just made the point about the photographs, and I'd asked why on earth we would have held illicit or unauthorised gatherings in the presence of an official photographer. Then I went on to say, most important of all, if it was obvious to me that these events were contrary to the guidance and the rules, then it must have been equally obvious to dozens of others, including the most senior officials in the country, all of them, most of them like me, responsible for drawing up the rules, and it must have been obvious to others in the building, including the current Prime Minister. On the contrary, the overwhelming evidence which you have assembled is that these individuals believed that the rules and the guidance were being complied with. And what is so telling is the number of officials who say the same thing and the total silence of the written or electronic record about concerns that anyone wanted to raise with me. It would be one thing if the committee had come here today and said, look, here are the emails or here are the WhatsApps that show that you were warned about rule breaking before you made your statements to the House. You haven't got any such evidence because that never happened. But if you now say instead that it must have been obvious that we were going against the rules and the guidance, then let's be clear about what you are saying. You're not only accusing me of lying, you're accusing all those civil servants, advisors, MPs, of lying about what they believed at the time to be going on. And as far as I know, you're not giving any of them the chance to explain themselves with their own oral evidence. I don't think you seriously mean to accuse those individuals of lying, and I don't think you can seriously mean to accuse me of lying. Now, everyone knows that there are some features of this proceeding that are extremely peculiar. I have the utmost respect for you, the Chair, but you have said some things about this matter before reading the evidence, which are plainly and wrongly prejudicial or prejudge the very issue on which you are adjudicating. I'm going to put your earlier remarks down to the general cut and thrust of politics and trust in what you have stressed at the outset, the impartiality that the committee insists upon and insists upon in your report. The committee is in fact supposed to be inquiring strictly into what I said about rule breaking rather than non-statutory guidance, so much of this interrogation is theoretically irrelevant, but I'm going to take that in my stride because I agree with what you said at the outset. It is your job, in which I want to help you, to understand why I said what I said to Parliament and whether I deliberately set out to deceive. And I emphatically did not. Your first concern is that I may have knowingly or recklessly deceived Parliament on the 1st and 8th December when I said that the rules had not been broken and the guidance had been followed completely in number 10. When I said those words, I was not trying to cover up or conceal anything. I said what I said in good faith, based on what I honestly knew and reasonably believed at the time. That belief, what was in my head, was based on my understanding of the rules and the guidance. That did not mean that I believed that social distancing was complied with perfectly. That is because I and others in the building did not believe it was necessary or possible to have a 2 metre or 1 metre after June the 24th, 2020, electrified force field around every human being. Indeed, that is emphatically not what the guidance prescribes. It specifically says that social distancing should be maintained where possible, having regard to the work environment, and it is clear that in number 10 we had real difficulties in both working efficiently and at speed and in maintaining perfect social distancing. It's a cramped, narrow 18th century townhouse. We had no choice but to meet day in, day out, 7 days a week in an unrelenting battle against COVID. I had to call many meetings on the spot and to call make a great many high-speed decisions. Yes, we certainly did have social distancing. We avoided physical contact. We gave way to each other in the corridors and on the stairs. We gave each other as wide a berth as we could. But it would have been impossible to have a drill sergeant measuring the distance between us all hours of the day and night. So, as the guidance prescribes, we had mitigations. When I spoke about the guidance being followed, I was thinking of all the things we did to stop the spread of COVID, given where we were working. We had large numbers of people working from home. We had many meetings, at least partly on Zoom. We had limits on the numbers per room. We had sanitizer dispensers everywhere. We had signs on the walls telling you which way to walk. We kept windows open and we worked outside as much as possible. Because of the particular difficulties caused by the working environment, we had regular testing, and a whole testing system was set up, I believe, on the 3rd floor that went way beyond what was required in the guidance. So if you say, how could I stand up in Parliament and be so categorical about following the guidance? What was I thinking of? That is what I was thinking of. And I know you will, as you've just done, point to the photos and then to the guidance and what I said. And you will say it must have been obvious that the guidance was being breached. But that is simply not true. My beliefs and my remarks to Parliament were indeed based on my knowledge of those events. But you have to understand how I saw them and what I saw during the period I was there. The vast majority of the events relied upon by the committee are events I attended for 10 or 15 minutes, perhaps a maximum of 25 in one case, to say farewell to a departing colleague. I know that people around the country will look at those events and think they look like the very kind of events that we or I were forbidding to everyone else. But I will believe till the day I die that it was my job to thank staff for what they had done, especially during a crisis like COVID, which kept coming back, which seemed to have no end, and when people's morale did, I'm afraid, begin to sink. But never mind what I think, the more important point is that the police agreed. They did not find that my attendance at any of these farewell gatherings was against the rules. I obviously did not know at the time that any of these events later escalated beyond what was lawful after I left. There is, of course, one event for which I and the current Prime Minister received fixed penalty notices. But it never occurred to me, or I think the current Prime Minister at the time, that the event was not in compliance with the rules and the guidance. At about 2:22 p.m. on the 19th of June 2020, I went into the cabinet room where I worked after getting back from a long external visit. I stood at my desk briefly before another COVID meeting began and had a kind of salad. A number of officials came in to wish me a happy birthday. No one sang. The famous Union Jack cake remained in its Tupperware box, unnoticed by me, and was later discovered and eaten by my private secretaries. We talked, as you would expect, about COVID and what we were doing to beat the pandemic. It is a measure of how innocent we thought this meeting was that an slightly exaggerated version was briefed to the Times with singing and cake eating, and yet nothing untoward was apparently detected either by the reporter or by millions of eagle-eyed readers. So when I spoke to the Commons, it did not for 1 second on the 1st or the 8th of December, or at any time, it did not 1 second occur to me that this event, the one event for which I was fined, would later be found to be somehow against the rules. And the same goes for all the events I attended. My belief was that we were following the rules and the guidance to the best of our ability, given the circumstances, and that was what the guidance required. You may now say that I was being obtuse or oblivious and that we should have enforced social distancing more ruthlessly. And we can argue that back and forth. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. We're talking about what I believed at the time. As for the event of the 18th of December 2020 in the press room, I was not there, but my honest belief that it was within the rules was based on what I was told by senior advisors. The fact that this was my honest belief is supported by the fact that so many other people honestly believed that we were doing nothing wrong. And it's abundantly clear from the evidence produced by the committee that everyone was operating with the same understanding of the rules and the guidance. If you want further evidence of what was going on in my head, look at the WhatsApp to Jack Doyle, where I positively urge him to get the truth out to the public, the truth out about that December the 18th event. It seemed so unfair to me, based on what I had been told, that the event was being presented as a purely social gathering on what I knew to be a monumentally busy day for the media department, when they were coping both with the emergence that day of the Kent variant of COVID and what some saw as the risk of a no-deal Brexit. That was why I was inclined to believe that this event must be in line with the rules and the guidance. And that's why I said what I said on December the 1st. As for my statements on December the 8th, the committee is concerned that I may have misled the House when I said that I was repeatedly assured that the event was in accordance with the rules. I don't understand this point. You can see from the evidence that I received these assurances more than once and from more than one person. My statement was entirely accurate. The committee criticises the fact that I had not received assurances in relation to the guidance, but I never said that I had. I said what I said about the guidance based on my own experience and belief. The committee is critical of the fact that I did not receive assurances in respect of any event other than the December the 18th event. But I never said that I had. The committee seems at times to be saying in your fourth report that I should not be relying on the advice of political advisers or even officials. This is ridiculous. I was the Prime Minister of the UK. I was trying to run the country during a pandemic. On the evening in question, 30th of November 2021, I was dealing with the emergence of the Omicron variant and the growing clamour for restrictions on another Christmas. I could not drop what I was doing, get up and go and institute a personal investigation into what sounded like a Daily Mirror try-on about an event that was now almost a year old. I had to rely on, and was fully entitled to rely on, what I was told by my senior trusted advisers. Government would be paralysed if ministers were not able to do so. Finally, the committee criticises the manner in which I corrected the record. I corrected the record on the day of Sue Gray's final report and 6 days after the completion of the police investigation. If the committee's view is that I should have come to the House and provided an inevitably incomplete account while a government or a police investigation was going on, including into events I hadn't even attended, I fundamentally disagree. At all times, I was entirely transparent with the House. I made it clear that I did not intend to comment on any of the factual matters until the investigation had been concluded. I kept the House regularly updated, and as soon as the investigations were complete, I provided a full correction of my honest but inadvertently misleading statements. I apologise. I apologise for inadvertently misleading this House, but to say that I did it recklessly or deliberately is completely untrue, as the evidence shows. Whatever we got wrong, I believe that officials in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, and indeed all Whitehall departments, should be immensely proud of their efforts to protect this country from a loathsome disease. When I point out to this committee that this disease almost killed me, it's only to stress how seriously I took the measures we needed to stop it spreading, as I believe everyone did in Number 10, in Downing Street. It was those officials who organised and took the country through the lockdowns, which, whatever people may say about them now, were essential for public health. It was those officials who procured the vaccines that made sure this was the first country in the world to put an approved and effective vaccine in the arm of a patient, and it was those officials who helped mastermind the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe. It was thanks to those officials that we were able to come out of lockdown faster than any other European country, with all the social and economic benefits that entailed, and still to have a lower excess mortality rate than many other comparable countries. I am proud to have known and worked with those officials during one of the most difficult times we can remember. I am proud to have given them leadership, and that is what I believe I was doing at every one of the events in question. And I trust that the committee will be fair to them, fair to me, fair to the evidence about what we and I knew and believed, and conclude that I did not wittingly mislead the House of Commons or recklessly mislead the House of Commons, and that no contempt has been committed.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Before I turn to our questions, there's one issue that you raised, which your lawyers wrote to me about on Monday, and which I've replied to you this morning about. You raised the issue of the importance of the committee being fair to officials, and we would very much agree with you about that. And that is why we're not content with putting into evidence interview notes that officials gave to Sue Gray until such time as those officials had a chance to check those interview notes and to agree whether they're accurate, and then they can be supported by a statement of truth, which is like an oath, and then they can be put into evidence to us. If you would like to identify some officials and some aspects of the Sue Gray interview notes that you would like to then get under statements of truth and submit to this inquiry, the inquiry doesn't finish with this oral evidence session. You are perfectly at liberty to do that, and I would invite you to do that, and we can consider it. Thank
you. I will do that. There are about 16 points that we wish to elucidate, and it would be helpful to do that.
Okay, thank you. And we're putting now in the public domain your lawyer's letter to me and also my reply to you this morning, so that people can be clear about that. We'll now begin our questions, starting with those which cover the 6 gatherings that the committee thinks are the most relevant to our inquiry. When asked in the House of Commons about gatherings in number 10 from December 2021 onwards, you told the House that COVID rules and guidance were followed completely and at all times. Following the publication in May 2022 of the report which you'd commissioned into gatherings on government premises, you continued to maintain that it was certainly the case that the rules and guidance were followed at gatherings you had attended to wish farewell to staff who were leaving number 10. We will put to you what the COVID rules and guidance were on those 6 dates, what you knew about the gatherings that took place on each of those dates and their compliance with the rules and guidance then in force. We'll start by looking at 2 leaving gatherings that you attended in November 2020. We'll primarily be focusing on these gatherings' compliance with the COVID workplace guidance in place at the time. These gatherings took place during a national lockdown in England. The legal rules in force to prevent the spread of COVID included restrictions on indoor gatherings of 2 or more people. The workplace guidance in force at that time stated that there should be social distancing of 2 metres in the workplace wherever possible, and that only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend meetings. I will now invite Sir Bernard Jenkin to ask the first question. Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. So as the Chair described, we will first consider what knowledge you had of the rules and guidance in place at the time of each of the events you attended or of which you had knowledge, by reminding ourselves of what you were telling the country about the rules and guidance, and then we will ask about those gatherings. Now, you were aware of the importance of following the guidance the government had issued to keep workplaces safe. Indeed, you previously told the House of Commons on the 2nd of September 2020, and I quote, "It's very important that we get people back into the workplace in a COVID-secure way," unquote. And then on the 9th of November 2020, less than a week before the first of the gatherings that I will ask you about, you said at a COVID press conference, and I quote, "Neither mass testing nor progress on vaccines are at the present time a substitute for the national restrictions for social distancing and all the rest. So it is all the more important to follow the rules," unquote. And at the press conferences over this period, you regularly repeated the phrase, hands, face, space, while standing at podiums bearing this phrase. So there can be no doubt that you understood what the guidance and rules meant and were intended to achieve. Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. On the 13th of November 2020, which we saw Catherine West just asking about on the film earlier, there was an impromptu leaving gathering for your then Director of Communications, Lee Kane. This was held in the vestibule outside the press office in number 10. Between 15 and 20 people were present and you gave a speech. And the evidence for this is at page 9 of the evidence bundle. Do you accept that these facts are correct?
Yes.
We will now show the pictures, which you have made your comments about, but nevertheless we will ask you about them. The unpixelated photos are on page 540 and 580 in the bundle of the total evidence pack. The pictures show you with at least 6 to 8 other people standing in close proximity. I want to ask first about this gathering's compliance with the guidance. You told the House of Commons as recently as the 25th of May 2022, which was the day of the publication of the Sucre report, that it was, and I quote, certainly the case, strong words, that guidance had been followed at gatherings you attended to wish staff farewell, at least while you were there. At least while you were there. But the photographs show a lack of social distancing of 2 metres, which was required by the workplace guidance at the time.
It was 1 metre we were together.
So do you accept that you were present at this gathering and that people were not socially distanced while you were there?
Thank you very much, Sir Bernard. I don't accept that people were not making an effort to distance themselves socially from each other, and that happened the whole time in number 10. Actually, I think that the guidance by November 2020 stipulated that you should maintain 1 metre social distancing where possible, with mitigation where 2 metres is not viable. And at all stages, the guidance was intended to be implemented where possible, and that is absolutely clear from the guidance. As I said in my introduction, it was always the case that we understood that the confines of number 10 were going to make it impossible the whole time to enforce total social distancing, as it were, with an electric force field around every individual. Now, this meeting happened on an impromptu basis. It had to happen. It happened because on November the 13th, 2 senior members of and people will ask, why was this happening? Why was it necessary? It was necessary because 2 senior members of staff, the effective chief of staff and the director of communications, had both left the building or were about to leave the building in pretty acrimonious circumstances, or what were potentially acrimonious circumstances. It was important for me to be there and to give reassurance. And the salient point I would venture to make is that following that gathering, no fine was issued to me. My presence there was felt by the Met to be not to be unlawful. They agreed that it was a work-related event, and I believe it was absolutely essential for work purposes.
Right, well, I'm asking about the guidance at the moment.
Yes, and I'm telling you that I believe the guidance so what you've got to understand, when I looked at that group, it did not for one second occur to me that we were in breach of the guidance, given the logistical difficulties we faced in number 10 and the need to have urgent meetings such as this.
You said, you didn't quite answer my question to begin with, because you suggested that the picture doesn't show that people weren't making an effort to comply with the guidance. I'm just asking whether the evidence is that the guidance was being complied with, and I think by suggesting
I believe that the guidance is being complied with.
Right, okay, because I'll come to that, because it must have occurred to you that given that they weren't social distancing at 2 metres, that they might have been in breach of the social distancing guidance, either while you were at the gathering or indeed, as you reflected on this afterwards, as the storm broke around your head, you must have been thinking, well, I wonder whether that was really complying with the guidance. That must have occurred.
So, Bernard, forgive me, but I've got to correct you on a point of a technical point. After June 24th, 2020, the guidance was changed so that the objective was to maintain social distancing at 1 metre with mitigations where 2 metres were not viable.
I'll come to that. But I think the first point is that it's fair to say that you didn't say that we did every effort to comply with the guidance of the House of Commons, and you didn't say that...
No, I'm saying that we followed the guidance completely. No. Because you can't...
Okay, right.
We'll come to this in a minute.
Okay.
But you can't expect human beings in an environment like number 10 to have, as it were, a invisible electrified fence around them. They will occasionally drift into each other's orbit. When I saw that, it did not mean to me that we had breached the guidance. It meant that we were following the guidance to the best of our ability, which was what the guidance provided for. And the guidance provides for freedoms within the practical framework of the operation or the business to decide how you're going to implement the guidance. The measures that you referred to at the outset are things that need usually to be complied with. Businesses are entitled and asked to decide what practical considerations they wish to give to implementing the guidance, and that is what we did. Can I just say, so people understand why I believed, because this is the crucial thing, if I may say so, why I believed when I stood up on December the 1st that the guidance was followed completely at all times in number 10. What picture I had in my head, and why that doesn't conflict with that picture. The answer is that I knew from my direct personal experience that we were doing a huge amount to stop the spread of COVID within the building. We had sanitizers, we had windows were kept open, we had people working outdoors wherever they could, we had Zoom meetings, we had restrictions on the number of people in rooms, we had perspex screens between desks, and above all, as I said, we had testing, regular testing, which went way beyond what the guidance prescribed, and which, in my view, helped mitigate the difficulties we had in maintaining perfect social distancing.
Right. I'm bound to say that if you'd said all that at the time to the House of Commons, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. But you didn't. And the question is about what the guidance actually says. And I noticed you taking a little advice at that point on the question of the guidance. Can I just read to you, it's on page 6 of the bundle, what the guidance actually says. You must maintain social distancing in the workplace wherever possible. Where the social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full in relation to a particular activity, the businesses should consider whether that activity be redesigned to maintain a 2 metre social distance, or 1 metre with risk mitigations where 2 metres is not viable. And the mitigating actions include using screens or barriers to separate people from each other. So where in the picture are there screens or barriers?
There were screens or barriers in the, I believe, in the adjacent press room from memory. This is an impromptu gathering at which I'm thanking staff, at least one member of staff, for his contribution during COVID. I believe it was an important part of my job to do that. That was the best place to do it. I accept that perfect social distancing, Sir Bernard, is not being observed, but that does not mean that what we were doing, in my view, is incompatible with the guidance. The guidance specifically allows for workplace freedoms to decide how to implement it, and the operative conditional is where possible. Now, do not for one moment believe that people in number 10 did not operate social distancing, because they did, and they took great effort. They made great efforts, in my view, to my memory, to stay apart from each other. But that didn't mean that they were able to stay apart from each other the whole time. That's what I'm saying. Well, that did not conflict with the guidance.
Nobody is devaluing the efforts of anybody in number 10 during the COVID, including you, by the way, and the public service you gave during your period as Prime Minister during the pandemic. All we're asking is I'm afraid it's our obligation.
I'm trying to explain to you why I said that the guidance was followed.
I'm halfway through a question. All I'm saying is that we've got to find out, establish in our minds, whether what you told the House of Commons was strictly accurate. And the guidance goes on to say Where social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full, even through redesigning a particular activity, businesses should consider whether that activity needs to continue for the business to operate, and if so, take all the mitigating actions possible to reduce the risk of transmission between the staff. Now, nobody is disputing that it's the right thing for you to thank your staff. The question is whether what you said about this particular way of thanking your staff in the House of Commons was strictly accurate. And indeed may have been misleading. That's what we're asking.
Well, I don't believe for a second that it was.
The guidance does not say you can have a thank you party and as many people in the room as you like if you think it's very important to thank people. The guidance doesn't say that.
Let's just go back over that. I believed that this event was not only reasonably necessary, but it was essential for work purposes for the reasons that I have given. I've described the constraints in which we were operating in number 10. If you wanted to have a rapid gathering to thank people, this was the place to do it. There aren't, in fact, that many people there. I accept, though the pixelation makes it difficult to work out exactly who is where. I accept that perfect social distancing
unpixelated photographs.
Is
You've
not
got the
sure,
unpixelated
sure, but the
photographs.
public can't see that.
Yeah.
The public can't see that.
Yes, but that's
Bernard,
not.
I accept that not everybody is perfectly socially distanced in that picture, but that did not mean to me, when I stood up in the House of Commons and said that the guidance was followed completely, I was not thinking of that event and thinking that somehow that contravened the guidance. Absolutely not.
Okay.
We were making a huge effort to follow the guidance. That was my memory, and that is why I said what I said.
This is exactly the purpose of this session, that you can make the case that you're making. Can we move on to examine the compliance with the COVID rules at this gathering? As we heard in the clips earlier, you told the House the rules were followed at all times, so you must have thought the gathering was reasonably necessary for work purposes, as was then required by the regulations. We know that the gathering attracted fixed penalty notices. So in fact, the police have judged that it broke the rules. Why did you think it was within the rules?
I thought it was essential for work purposes, or at least reasonably necessary for work purposes, because for the reason I've given, Sir Bernard, that November the 13th was a day in which two senior officials, senior advisors in government, had left their jobs in very, very difficult and challenging circumstances. And it was necessary to steady the ship. It was necessary to show that there was no rancour, that the business of the government was being carried on. That's what we had to do. That's what I had to do.
I know that, but it's what you said about it to the House of Commons is what matters. We know it was a leaving event for a member of staff. The photographs we've just seen do not seem to show any actual work being done. Why did it not occur to you that it at least might have been in breach of the regulations, or at least because it was not reasonably necessary for work purposes?
Did you say, did it occur to me that it might not be reasonably necessary for work purposes?
Yes.
No, it didn't occur to me for 1 second that it wasn't reasonably necessary for work purposes.
To do it in that particular way and then say that particular thing about the way that event was actually carried on.
And I really, to this day, and as I said earlier on, I struggle to see how I could have run number 10, run hundreds of officials who needed to be thanked and appreciated for their work in very trying circumstances without having brief farewell events of a kind that, at least insofar as my participation was concerned, did not fall foul of the rules. I just remind you of that key point about that event. I was not. I was there for a maximum of 20 minutes or 25 minutes, I think. I gave a short speech.
Could I cut in at
what
this
I did
point?
was not found to have been in
Mr.
breach of the rules.
Could I cut in at this point? Because how long you were at the gathering is not a question
No, I understand
that Mr.
that.
Jacob,
I understand
that
that,
Sir
Chair.
Bernard is asking you. And while I'm interjecting, you raised the question of imperfect social distancing. Social distancing, hands, face, space, which is the space part, is either 2 metres at this time, or it's 1 metre with mitigations.
2 metres
and Sir
where
Bernard,
possible.
2 metres.
2 metres where possible.
2 metres or 1 metre with mitigations, which is screens.
It doesn't say 1 metre where possible.
It
doesn't say that.
The objective of social distancing is to maintain social distancing wherever possible. That's what it says.
What is the notion of a less than perfect, an imperfect social distancing? Because you were telling the country to do social distancing.
Yes, but so did we in number 10. And but I'm sure, by the way, that up and down the country, in spite of people's observance of social distancing, there were times when people drifted within 1 or 2 metres of each other. That is, I'm afraid, just inevitable. And we had a particular problem in number 10 because, as I said earlier on, we had to call meetings at great speed. We had large numbers of staff that had to come into the building because we needed to get a variety of opinions, even though we had loads and loads of people also on Zoom. And it was not we had as you know, because you've been to look at it. We had lots of higgledy-piggledy corridors where it wasn't, and spaces where it wasn't always easy to maintain perfect social distancing. That did not mean to, like that space there. That did not mean to me that
about higgledy-piggledy corridors. If you could just refer yourself to Sir Bernard's next question, which is about an event.
There were lots of people leading critical organisations around the country, and a leaving do for everyone else around the country was not acceptable under the guidelines, all the rules. So why was it acceptable and necessary for work purposes in number 10?
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Well, I want to repeat what I said at the beginning. I understand that people looking at that photograph will think that it looks like a social event. It was not a social event. If anybody thinks that I was partying during lockdown, they're completely wrong. That was not a party. I was there to.
I haven't said it was a party, Mr. Johnson.
Well, you did actually earlier on. What I was doing was thanking staff, or thanking one individual in particular, for their contribution, and I believe that was my job.
So, if you'd been asked at a press conference with your podium saying "hands, face, space," whether it was okay for organisations to hold unsocially distanced farewell gatherings in the workplace, what would you have said?
I would have said that it's up to organisations, as the guidance says, to decide how and they are going to implement the guidance, amongst which is, of course, social distancing. Where they can't do social distancing perfectly, they can't maintain 2 metres or 1 metre, then they're entitled to have mitigations. And that's what the guidance says. And we did indeed have plenty of mitigations, including, and as I've said to you before, this was exceptional in number 10, we had a great deal of testing.
So the answer is you would have said it was okay?
No, I said the answer is that you should do what the guidance says. And the guidance says that where you put in mitigations, where you do what is possible, then and where you follow social distancing in a way that is that reflects the realities of your workspace, that will be in compliance with the guidance. That was my view, and I think that's what everybody else understood. Well, certainly that, and just can I repeat this point? This is what everybody understood, I believe, in number 10. It's for a long period of 20 months of the struggle against COVID, during which we were having, as the Prime Minister himself has said, describing the experience of walking into loads of rooms and finding lots of people there. It was simply part of working in number 10 that we were going to come into contact with a great number of people. But people did follow social distancing, and they were acutely conscious of it.
I now turn to the 27th of November 2020. This was another unplanned leaving gathering for a different special advisor that again took place in the vestibule outside the press office in number 10. And we have 3 witness statements attesting to a lack of social distancing at this event. We've got, and this is on page 17 of your witness bundle, we've got Jack Doyle, who was your press secretary at the time and subsequently your director of communications, saying that there were certainly more than 20 people in attendance. And do you accept that?
I don't know. I wasn't at that event, and it wasn't an event that was found to have been in breach of the rules.
There's no reason to dispute it.
Well, I happen to know because we've all seen the same evidence bundle. Though I think this is one of the things that you have that we haven't been allowed to point to. I think there is evidence from at least one of the participants that there weren't that many people there, and it lasted a very short time.
Well, by all means, make sure that's drawn to our attention.
Oh, sorry. This is the Clio event. Sorry.
Sorry, you mustn't mention any names.
I think that name we can mention. That event. My memory of that event. Forgive me, I was at that event, but I was there very briefly.
I was going to correct you.
Thank you. So I was at that event, but I was there very briefly. No fines were issued for that event.
Order. I'm afraid we have to suspend the committee again. There's a division in the Commons. We'll return in 15 minutes. I'll resume this evidence session. Sir Bernard.
Just on one point, you were quibbling about the meaning of the guidance, which does say wherever possible, but not in respect of less than 1 metre where mitigations are obligatory. That's not wherever possible. It doesn't say mitigations wherever possible. They are essential if you cannot do 2 metres, and we couldn't see any mitigations in the photographs.
Oh.
Sorry,
Sir Bernard, if I may. What the guidance says, as far as I can see, is it ensures workers maintain social distance guidelines of 2 metres or 1 metre with risk mitigations where 2 metre is not viable, wherever possible. That conditional wherever possible governs both 2 metres and 1 metre.
Okay, well, we will address that point in our report. We will take consideration of what you're
I
don't think we agree with your interpretation of the guidance. But anyway,
can I say whatever this is a very important point.
No,
because whatever your interpretation of the guidance may be, what matters, if I may respectfully say, is what I believed to have been our efforts to follow the guidance. Why I thought that they were credible and wholehearted, and what I was thinking of at the time I spoke.
And ask you to allow Sir Bernard to ask his next question.
Of course.
Thank you very much. We were talking about the 3 witness statements about the 27th November 2020 event, which was a leaving event for another special advisor in the vestibule number 10, where there were certainly more than 20 people, and I think you accepted that.
Sorry, can I come back on that?
Okay, certainly.
I think there's conflicting evidence on that point. And
right,
if you look at what Sue Gray has to say, she says 15 to 20.
But we're not relying on Sue Gray's evidence, isn't that ironic?
So are you saying that evidence is invalid?
No, I think that any evidence collected by Sue Gray has to be independently verified with a statement of truth, which is why we can't publish the evidence, the material which you've given us, which has not been accepted.
Perhaps it'd be helpful if I gave my evidence about that.
No, I think it'd be very helpful if there anything in Sue Gray's witness statements that were collected in the interview notes would be dealt with separately, as the chairman described earlier.
I think it'd be helpful if Sir Bernard was enabled to ask his question and you would give a succinct answer.
Right. So you'll see also on page 17 of your bundle that another witness stated that they couldn't get through the room to leave because people were standing 4 to 5 people deep. Is there any reason why we should disbelieve that?
Well, I've seen all the testimony about this event, and there's testimony from there's the Sue Gray evidence that I've mentioned, and it seems quite incredible to me that we now can't adduce what she had to say after extensively interviewing people. She said there were 15 to 20 people she thought at that event. It's also the case that the person who was leaving on that occasion, Cleo Watson, I think we can name her, according to my understanding, she said that it was a clutch of officials and that it lasted a very short time indeed. And she said, I think that there was a speech by me that lasted 45 seconds and a speech by her that lasted 15 seconds from memory. I was certainly there very briefly indeed. And to get to your point, Sir Bernard, the quotation that you have about that event does not actually accord with my own memory.
Which quotation is this?
Of the 4 to 5 people deep and more than 20 people in attendance. I actually remember my memory of the event is much more in line with what Cleo Watson has to say and what Sue Gray had to say about the event.
Okay. Finally, you will see on page 17 of your bundle that another witness said that you joked during the gathering that it was, and I quote, probably the most unsocially distanced gathering in the UK right now, unquote. At paragraph 63 of your evidence, your written submission, you do say that you don't remember saying that, those particular words, but are you therefore denying that you said this?
I don't remember saying those words, and I think it unlikely that I would have said those words given what I've had to say to the committee just now about my memory of the event. My visual memory of the event is that it was much more as Claire Watson describes. It was a clutch of people around that table, the same table that you've just been looking at. I don't remember people being 4 or 5 deep. I don't remember saying that.
Well,
but what I will say...
Look, I'm sorry, you're giving very long answers, and it's taking longer than we need, and
Please.
You're repeating yourself quite a lot. Can we just get on with the questions? Thank you very much. So you're actually not denying you said this, but you can't recall saying it. That's what
I think it's unlikely that I said that.
But you
that
also
doesn't mean I didn't
state
say things
okay,
about
thank
social
you.
distancing.
You answered the question. You also state in your written submission of paragraph 63, and I quote, that you might well have made observations in speeches about social distancing, unquote. So what sort of observations?
I might well have made observations about the importance of social distancing, since it was very much on our minds.
Right, okay. But how right would it be to conclude that you can't be sure that you did not comment on the lack of social distancing and at this or any of the other gatherings you attended? Because otherwise, why would you have raised it?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, I'm just... You're not denying you might have said that what I read out.
I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely, given the number of people that I remember seeing. I think it's unlikely, given the number of people I saw.
It would be quite fair to conclude that that you did comment on the lack of social distancing at events. It's quite fair.
It's certainly likely that I would have drawn attention to the importance of social distancing, since that was very high in people's minds.
To the importance of social distancing, if everyone was obeying social distancing, obviously, it seems
because
likely.
as we've just extensively discussed, there might be occasions when people gathered together at high speed and where social distancing was imperfectly observed.
Well,
that did not mean that I thought the guidance was not being followed, but given all that I've said earlier about observing social distancing where possible.
Well, you do accept that the evidence we have under statement of truth that indicate that those who were at this gathering very clearly indicate that there was insufficient social distancing at this gathering. You do accept that?
I say that some of them do, some of them don't.
And we've established that you were familiar with the social distancing guidance, you were at the gatherings, there was a lack of social distancing, so it must have been, yes, obvious to you at the time, and even more obvious on reflection afterwards, as this whole thing broke around you, that it was in breach of workplace guidance relating to social distancing.
No, that's not correct. What I thought was that we had done our best to implement the guidance, and in fact had thoroughly and completely implemented the guidance, but clearly when it came to things like social distancing, as the guidance explicitly provides for, it was not possible at all times to have perfect social distancing, and that you could have mitigations.
But as recently as the 25th of May, you said it was certainly the case, 25th of May 2022, last year, it was certainly the case that social distancing guidance was being respected at all times. But I think you're now saying it was imperfect.
Sorry, what I'm trying to... there's a confusion between social distancing and the guidance. The guidance comprises social distancing amongst other things. And what we were trying to do was follow the guidance to the best of our ability. That meant that sometimes social distancing could not be perfectly observed. There were other mitigations we put in place.
The guidance also said that only necessary participants should physically attend the workplace meetings. Absolutely necessary participants.
It said
so
usually. It said usually.
When you attended these events, when you didn't even know who was attending, how were you so certain that everyone there was absolutely necessary to attend these events?
Bernard, these events were, of course, not organised by me personally. I relied upon my excellent officials to make sure that we had the right people in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now move on to examine two gatherings that took place earlier in 2020, both of which you attended, Mr. Johnson. We'll look at the gathering which took place on the 19th of June 2020. This was a gathering in the Cabinet Room to mark your birthday. We'll also look at the gathering that took place on the 20th of May 2020, which was a gathering for staff in the number 10 garden.
Yeah.
The legal rules in force to prevent the spread of COVID varied between May and June 2020, but at both times the relevant rules included restrictions on gatherings of 2 or more people. The workplace guidance in force at that time stated that there should be social distancing of 2 metres in the workplace wherever possible, and that only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend meetings. I'll now invite Yvonne Fauvard to ask our questions about these gatherings, and I would ask if you could, because we've already covered quite a lot of ground, if you could answer as succinctly as possible.
Of course, because I may be repeating what I need to say.
Thank you. Mr Johnson, before I ask my questions, can we again confirm your knowledge of the rules and guidance in place at the time by reminding ourselves of what you're telling the country? You told the House of Commons on the 11th of May that, and I quote, "If you must go to work and cannot work from home, you should do so provided that your workplace is COVID secure and that you observe the rules on social distancing." We are publishing further guidance on that. You also told the House on the 11th of May that people should be limiting contact with others and keeping your distance to 2 metres apart where possible. That was just a week before the gathering on the 20th of May. And then on the 10th of June, just over a week before the gathering of the 19th of June, you said at a COVID press conference, I quote, "I urge everyone to continue to show restraint and respect the rules which are designed to keep us all safe. So please, to repeat what you've heard so many times before, stay alert, maintain social distancing and keep washing your hands." You agree that those were the rules in force at the time?
Yes, thank you.
Let's turn first to the gathering of the 19th of June 2020, where breaches of both the COVID rules and the guidance are an issue. We'll show pictures of this gathering on the screen, and the unpixelated photos are on page 359 and 414 in bundle 1 of the total evidence. The pictures show that you attended a gathering in the Cabinet Room on this date to mark your birthday with at least 17 other people in attendance. Now, the attendees included your wife and your interior designer, didn't they?
They certainly included my wife and son, and yes, there was a contractor who was working in the building who popped her head round the door very briefly.
So there was your wife and your interior designer were present, and you were issued with a fixed penalty notice for this event. And you've just confirmed that at least 2 people attended who were not work colleagues. Why did you think this was reasonably necessary for work purposes, as was required by the rules at the time?
But this was an event that took place, as you say, on my birthday. I'd come back from a long external visit. I thought it was reasonably necessary for work purposes because I was standing at my desk surrounded by officials who'd been asked to come and wish me a happy birthday. I'd only recently recovered from an illness, from COVID, and it seemed to me to be a perfectly proper thing to do. We were about to have another meeting, and they were very largely the same officials.
And presumably your wife and the contractor were not attending that meeting.
It is one of the peculiarities of number 10 that the Prime Minister and his family live in the same building. And my understanding of the rules is that the Prime Minister's family is entitled to use that building and use every part of that building.
Turning now to the guidance in respect of that event. The COVID workplace guidance then in place said that workplace meetings should be socially distanced and only attended by those whose participation was absolutely necessary. Now, the 2 pictures we see on the screen show the gathering wasn't socially distanced and it was attended by people who were not absolutely necessary to be there. So would it not have been obvious to you that the event was in breach of the guidance?
No, and it's a measure of how unobvious it was to me that this was any kind of breach at all, that we actually, or the press office, actually publicised this meeting in the Times newspaper, briefed it out, as I said earlier on, with a slightly embellished account. I had absolutely no sense while this event was taking place, and indeed later on, at any time, that this event was in contravention of either the rules or the guidance, nor did anybody, before I spoke in the House of Commons, suggest to me that it was. And I think that the then Chancellor, who also received an FPN, would have been just as surprised as I was.
You didn't reflect on the event afterwards as to whether it was in both rules and guidance before you spoke in the House of Commons?
No, I didn't. And that's because it was a long time ago. I'm afraid it had entirely slipped my mind, and I thought it was a completely innocent event. It was a very brief event. I'm standing at the desk at the place I would have normally sat. It did not strike me as being anything other than an ordinary common or garden workplace event.
So can we now turn to the 20th of May 2020, and that was a gathering in the number 10 garden for staff. We've evidence that you were present at this gathering while you were there. There were up to 40 people also there. And at this time, a gathering had to be essential for work purposes to be within the regulations. Now, we've got evidence that the email invitation for this gathering, which was sent by your principal private secretary, Martin Reynolds, was sent to 200 odd people, and that it encouraged staff who attended to bring their own alcohol. That's on page 35 of your bundle. Did you see the invitation email at any time before it was made public?
No.
You didn't see the email itself, but were you aware that the email was sent to 200 odd people and invited staff to bring their own alcohol? So what was your understanding of the purpose of the gathering?
To thank staff who've been working very hard on COVID, and it seemed to me, I think I was told about it only shortly before I was ushered out into it. The purpose of it was to thank them in a obviously a ventilated area, the garden.
So did you discuss the purpose of the gathering with any officials before it took place?
Yes, I think I would have been told. I don't remember it, but I think I would have been told that the COVID team is gathering outside. It's been a very tough time. This was a day when the Cabinet Secretary had just stepped down. I think the civil servants needed to feel that, as I said, in respect of another event, that the business of government was being carried on, and they needed to feel thanked and motivated for their work, and that's what I did.
So you were aware of the gathering before it took place?
Briefly, yes, but I think it was one of those things where, as I think Sue Gray may point out in her report, I don't know what value we now attach to it, but when you're Prime Minister, you move around, quite rightly, your officials give you the next thing to do, and you go and do it, and this was the next thing to do. I then went and had a telephone audience with Her Majesty.
We've evidence that some officials and advisors felt the event shouldn't go ahead. On page 34 of your bundle, your then Director of Communications, Lee Kane, describes the tone of the email invitation as clearly social and in breach of COVID guidance, and says he raised concern about it with Martin Reynolds. Another official gave us evidence saying, and I quote, "I heard there were so many people who were unhappy about the party that they were not going to go, and they themselves said to another official that they thought it was madness." That evidence is on page 38 of your bundle. Were any concerns about the gathering's compliance with COVID rules or guidance raised directly with you at the time?
No, and the individual that you mentioned who raised concerns, Lee, was, if you read what he says, he was concerned about the optics, not about the rules, and he himself attended the event, and certainly no concerns were raised with me.
If the event had been within the rules, why was he concerned about the optics?
I think I can't say. I think he was concerned about the impression that people might gain if they looked over the garden wall, if they were coming from the media room, and thought that we were doing something that other people weren't allowed to do. And I in my opening remarks, I made clear that I can see why people might have felt that way. But as I told the House when I came to report on that event, I still believe it was within the guidance and within the rules.
Did Lee Kane discuss or raise concerns about the gathering with you at the time? And
No.
his evidence suggests he might have done. He said, I quote, "I don't recall if I personally had a conversation with the PM about the garden party, but it would have been highly unusual for me not to have raised a potentially serious communications risk with the PM directly."
And if he had thought, and if Dominic Cummings had thought that this thing really was against the rules and should not go ahead, they would have told Martin Reynolds, and it is inconceivable that it would have gone ahead.
Did Martin Reynolds discuss or raise any concerns about the gathering with you at the time? As his evidence suggests to us he may well have done. He said it's possible he raised concerns with you.
No, not that I can remember, no.
Were you otherwise aware of any concerns from what you've heard or read either before or after the gathering took place?
No. As I told the House of Commons about, and I gave quite a long series of remarks about this event. When I walked out into the garden, it seemed to me it was implicit in what we were doing that this was a work event.
As you'll see from pages 34, 40 and 41 of your bundle, we have evidence that trestle tables were set up on which alcohol was laid out, and that the attendees included your wife, as well as advisors who were not from Number 10 but from other government departments. Did you see that when you were at the gathering?
I had no hand in organising this. When you talk about trestle tables and so on, it was. And there's no prohibition.
Johnson,
sorry.
Permit me, if you would, is that she was not asking whether you organised the trestle tables with the alcohol on it. She was asking whether you saw the trestle tables with the alcohol.
I did see. I don't remember what exactly was on the trestle tables. I remember going around and thanking staff for what they were doing during COVID. Now, it is perfectly possible that my wife was in the garden as well, but she was entitled to be there. And she certainly didn't receive a fixed penalty notice for that event, and nor did I.
You'll also see from page 34 of your bundle that Lee Kane said he briefly attended the gathering, and that in his view it's clear from observing it that it was a purely social function. Did you share that view?
No, and that's certainly not what he said at the time, because if he thought that it was purely social and therefore against the rules, it is inconceivable that it would have gone ahead.
The Metropolitan Police have confirmed that fixed penalty notices were issued in relation to that gathering, so we know it breached the COVID regulations. We know that you knew what the regulations were, and we know you were in attendance. So it would have been obvious to you when you were there that the gathering was not essential for work purposes and was partially a social event, wouldn't it?
No, and if I'm with great respect, Mr. Fairbarg, I want to dispute the idea that it was not an essential gathering, or not a gathering that was reasonably necessary for work purposes. I don't know why the FPNs were issued, but it may be that they were issued to people who had not a good enough reason to come in from home to that gathering, or people who had come from elsewhere to that gathering. But my firm impression, I think it's certainly still the case that Martin Reynolds believes that gathering was within the rules and indeed within the guidance.
Would you have advised anyone else in the country if they'd asked you at one of the press conferences at that time to have a large social gathering in the garden?
It was not a large social gathering. It was a gathering intended, and I really must insist on this point. People who say that we were partying in lockdown simply do not know what they are talking about. People who say that that event was a purely social gathering are quite wrong. My purpose there was to thank staff, to motivate them in what had been a very difficult time and what was also a very difficult day in which the Cabinet Secretary had just resigned.
Did you think, Mr Johnson, that exceptions applied in Number 10 to workplace rules and social distancing guidelines that didn't apply to the hospitals and the care homes, workplaces that were also operating under incredibly difficult and challenging circumstances?
Of course not. And that's why we continued, that's why we had all the stipulations that I've discussed at great length with Sir Bernard about following the guidance.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I'll now hand back to the Chair.
Thank you. To complete this section of our questions, we'll look at two gatherings that took place at the end of 2020 and the start of 2021. The first we'll look at took place on the 14th of January 2021. That was a leaving gathering for two officials held in the pillared room of number 10. The next one we'll look at was a Christmas gathering in the vestibule on the 18th of December 2020. At the time of both gatherings, the legal rules in force to prevent the spread of COVID included restrictions on gatherings of 2 or more people, and workplace guidance stated that there should be social distancing of 2 metres in the workplace wherever possible, and that only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend meetings. I'll invite Alan Dorrans to ask you about these gatherings. Mr. Dorrans.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, before I ask my questions, can we again confirm your knowledge of the rules and guidance in place at that time by reminding ourselves of what you are telling the country? You told the House of Commons on the 2nd of September that it was very important that we get people back into the workplace in a COVID-secure way. This shows you're aware of the workplace guidance and its contents. Then on the 9th of November, you said at a COVID press conference that neither mass testing nor progress on vaccines are at the present time a substitute for the national restrictions, for social distancing and all the rest, so it is all the more important that we follow the rules. In addition, at a press conference on the 30th of December, you outlined a Tier 4 restriction which were enforced in London. A fortnight later, when the 14th of January gathering took place, you said the restriction meant not meeting up with friends or family indoors unless they are in the same household or support bubble, and avoiding large gatherings of any kind. My first question to you, is that your understanding of the rules?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My first question will concentrate on the gathering of the 14th of January 2021. This was a leaving event for two officials held in the pillared room at number 10. We have evidence that approximately 15 people attended. We will now show you a picture of this gathering on the screen. The unpixelated photo is in page 757 of bundle 2 of the total evidence. Here we see the picture on the screen, Ms. Johnson. The photograph shows yourself and at least other people, 11 other people in attendance in the unpixelated picture. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed fixed penalty notices were issued to some individuals who attended this gathering, as it breached the COVID regulations in place at the time and was not reasonably necessary for work. This breach of the COVID rules would have been obvious to you when you were there, wouldn't it?
No, I must respectfully disagree with you very strongly, Mr. Dorrans. On the contrary, what I see there is, and I know that there's some bottles on the table, but you have there you're looking actually. I think that's a Zoom. That's somebody a screenshot taken from Zoom, I would guess, because you've got people at this event. A large number of the people were actually on Zoom. You've got people who work with each other every day, who use that room for meetings, and who are meeting briefly to say thank you and farewell to, I think, two talented young officials. I think Malcolm Reed and Alex Burns was the occasion, and it was the. Sorry, forgive me. I shouldn't mention the names of the officials. I've said they're talented, but anyway, those two officials were leaving, and it was my job to thank them and to show that their work was appreciated. I was there very briefly. I didn't receive an FPN. There's nothing I can see, and I've got to tell you this, there's nothing I can see in that photograph that strikes me as being either against the rules or the guidance. And what I actually see, and depending on how your perspective is, what I actually see is people trying to stay reasonably far apart from each other. That's what I see. Now, I don't know what happened later on, but I can tell you that for the period I was there, it seemed to me to be wholly in accordance with the rules and the guidance, and a proper use of my time, even if it was only brief.
Would you agree with the description of the gathering we received in evidence from an official who attended and who described the gathering as not strictly an event about work? This statement is on page 47 of your evidence bundle.
Well, I don't agree with that, because I think that it was essential to thank staff throughout the pandemic. There weren't very many of these occasions. When they occurred, I thought it was right and proper for me to motivate staff by saying how we were doing and to thank them for what they'd done. It wasn't just the staff who were leaving who needed to be appreciated, it was the staff who were there who needed to be motivated.
Thank you. The picture shows this gathering, and it appears to show multiple bottles of alcohol in the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph. Would you say that that is strictly necessary for a work event?
It's customary to say farewell to people in this country with a toast. I didn't see any sign of drunkenness or excess, and had no knowledge of. I don't know why anybody would have been fined for that event. I don't know what happened later on.
The next gathering we want to ask you about is a gathering on the 18th of December 2020, which we know was not compliant with code regulations, as some attendees received fixed penalty notices. This gathering was a pre-planned press office drinks event with cheese and wine, and was widely reported in the press. We have evidence that it was attended by between 25 and 40 people. You'll find the relevant statements on page 54 of your evidence bundle. Your official diary confirms that you were in 10 Downing Street that evening. Did you at any time join this gathering?
No. 18th of December?
I'm sorry?
The 18th of December 2020?
Yes.
No, absolutely
no. Okay. Your official diary on page 56 of the evidence bundle shows a gap between the hours of 1917 and 2024, and I appreciate this is difficult, but can you confirm where you were at that time?
I imagine I was working. I think from memory there was this was an evening when we were dealing not just with the emergence of the Kent variant with Delta, I think it was, but also with a great deal of anxiety about whether we were going to have a no-deal Brexit. I thought that anxiety was unfounded, of course, and we didn't. But it was a very long and very difficult evening. I think we had an extended COVID-O session, but I certainly did not attend that event and had no direct knowledge of it.
Okay, thank you. The Privileges Committee conducted a visit to 10 Downing Street, as you know. We established, you can clearly see from the suppressed vestibule where this gathering was taking place, from the bottom of the stairs leading up to then what was your flat in Downing Street. Your diary says you went to your flat at 21:58. Apparently the gathering went on until after midnight. Is your evidence that you did not see or hear the noise of a gathering of about 25 to 40 people taking place in the vestibule when you were going to your flat? If we just perhaps explain, there is a narrow corridor leading to the vestibule. Before you get to it, the staircase on the left leads to your flat. Your direct line of sight would be into the vestibule, not more than a few metres away. There's a gathering taking place with between 25 and 40 people. You had clear direct line of sight of that room. Are you telling me that your evidence is that you're not aware of the noise or the event taking place?
Absolutely, and what I would have, if I had looked, what I would have seen, I'm sure, was people doing a huge amount of work on a very, very busy evening. Now, I didn't look. I certainly have no memory of seeing any kind of party or illicit gathering going on in the press room on that evening. The first I heard about this thing, the first I knew about it, was when it was brought to my attention by Jack Doll, I think almost a year later.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, if we turn to pages 54 and 56 of your evidence bundle, you will see that this gathering was described in evidence we've received as beyond desk drinks and far more relaxed than it should have been, when people were shoulder to shoulder with each other, and that one number 10 staff member who did not attend said they later heard that the gathering had turned into a party. Did anyone tell you about that?
Well, no, they didn't. And this is the crucial point. Nobody raised any anxieties about that event with me before I stood up in the House of Commons. Nobody said to me that we've had something we've done something that in the almost a year that followed between December the 18th, 2020 and 30th of November 2021, when Jack Dole came to see me. The thing was a complete blank to me, right?
The Metropolitan Police have confirmed fixed penalty notices were issued to some attendees at that gathering. Clearly, therefore, it breached the rules. There are no witnesses to say that you were at the gathering, but did anyone make you aware at the time or after it happened that it had not been compliant with COVID rules?
No.
Thank you. Mr Johnson, before we move on to discuss what you said in the House about gatherings in number 10, you will know that fixed penalty tickets were issued in relation to gatherings in number 10 on 2 other dates, other than those we've asked you about. These gatherings took place on the 17th of December 2020 and the 16th of April 2021. This is confirmed by the Metropolitan Police statement at the end of Operation Hillman, which you'll find a copy of on page 89 and 91 of your evidence bundle. Did you ever have any reason to think that COVID rules may have been broken at this gathering on either of these dates prior to 2021? December 2021?
So which dates, forgive me, Alan?
17th of December and the 16th of April.
I don't remember hearing. So what I can tell the committee is none of these. I was conscious of none of these events as being in any way rule breaking or against the guidance until stories started to emerge about them, and that was after I had spoken in the Commons about them. So they weren't at all on my radar as things that I should be concerned about.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll hand you back to the chair.
Thank you. Mr Johnson, we've now considered the rules and guidance relating to COVID that were in force at the time of the gatherings we've discussed with you. We've considered your knowledge of the rules and guidance then in force, and we've considered your attendance at and knowledge of gatherings that were not socially distanced and for which fixed penalty notices were issued. We will now compare that with what you said to the House of Commons after media reports of these gatherings began emerging. We'll concentrate particularly on what you said to the House on the 1st of December and the 8th of December. We'll first examine your assertions that COVID rules and guidance were followed in number 10, and I'd like to invite Andy Carter to ask our questions about this.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Johnson, on the afternoon of the 30th of November, I understand the Daily Mirror contacted the press office at Downing Street saying they were planning to publish an article alleging that events had taken place in Downing Street in November and December 2020 where COVID rules had been broken. Now, the article appeared online later that day, and it was the paper's front page splash on the 1st of December. And I think you can see a copy of that on page 58 in your evidence bundle. I'm guessing you must have known that you would be asked about this at Prime Minister's Questions in the House of Commons the following day, the 1st of December. And sure enough, you were asked whether a Christmas party was held in number 10 on the 18th of December. And you told the House all guidance was followed completely in number 10. Picking up on the things that you've said in your opening statement and the evidence that you've given, you knew what the guidance was, i.e. maintaining social distancing wherever possible, and ensuring mitigation was in place if that wasn't possible. And you knew there'd been gatherings where social distancing hadn't necessarily been maintained and where masks, for example, weren't being worn and screens weren't in place, because we've seen some of the photographs there. So why did you tell the House all guidance was followed completely in number 10?
Thank you. So I'm not certain that there was any, just quickly, I'm not certain there was any requirement for masks indoors.
Part of mitigation.
I see, I'm with you. Okay. So the reason I said that all guidance was followed completely in number 10, and back to Mr. Dorrans and a lot of the questions that have been raised, between the event that took place and when I stood up to speak, in all the cases that you mentioned, nobody came to me and said, we've got a problem with this one. You need to worry about this. And I want you to, and there's no trace of that in the written evidence or in the electronic record. And that is a very extraordinary thing, given how serious that was. The reason I said what I said was because I believed then that the whole of the Number 10 team were doing a huge amount to follow the guidance. And I talked to Jack Doyle about what had happened at that event. This is on the evening of the 30th of November 2021. And it's about, my diary says it was about 6 o'clock. He comes in and he says that, as you say, the Daily Mirror is going to run this story. He mentions a few other events, two of which I knew directly about and knew that there was no, as I believed at the time, I knew that there was no issue with those. The other was something, I think it was something to do with an event at CCH, a Conservative Central Office, I knew absolutely nothing about. I asked him about this December 18th event, and I asked him to describe it. And bear in mind everything I've said about that evening, which was a horrendously busy and difficult evening, and we'd had a long COVID to discuss what to do with the Kent variant. He told me that it was within the rules. He said that people were sitting at their desks, drinking, admittedly, but that was not banned. That was under any of the either the rules or the guidance. It was not prohibited. It was regular, I'm afraid, for people to drink on Fridays. And I concluded that it sounded to me as though that event was within both the rules and the guidance. And that fortified me in what I stood up to say the following day. As it happens, when I said the guidance has been followed completely during Number 10, which is actually what I said, I was misremembering the line that had already been put out to the media about this event, which was COVID rules were followed at all times. But you've got to understand that I didn't think that there was any real distinction from the public's point of view between the rules and the guidance, in the sense that or our observance of, let me put it this way, I didn't think that the public would make any, they would expect us to follow the guidance as much as the rules. That's why, and so even though I'd said something slightly different, I still believed it was true.
Can I just, if you said something slightly different, can I ask you, why didn't you correct the record then? Because that would have been an obvious thing to do.
No,
and I understand the point you make. There is confusion between guidance and rules, but you could have corrected the record at that point.
Well, I didn't think there was any appreciable difference, because it was our job to follow the guidance as much as to follow the rules. And my view, as I've said repeatedly to the committee this afternoon, is that I believe we were following the guidance. And in spite of the pictures that we've all looked at, which seem to show a lack of perfect social distancing, I believe that what we were doing was in conformity with the rules, certainly it was for the period I was there, and I believe that the behaviour was reasonable given the constraints of the building, and therefore in accordance with the guidance. So that's what I said. I said.
I know you didn't attend the gathering on the 18th of December. You've just been very clear about that. But you had attended some of the other gatherings that we've talked about. And you've just said that you asked Mr. Kane about the gathering on the 18th. So why didn't you tell the House at that point, when you were asked, that there were some of the gatherings in Number 10?
I told, so it was Jack Doyle.
I'm sorry, Jack Doyle.
But because, and this goes to the heart of what we're trying to establish, I didn't think that those events were an issue. Nobody had previously raised them with me as being things that I ought to be concerned about. And they didn't, and as I've said repeatedly to you at the time, call me obtuse or oblivious, but they did not seem to me to be in conflict with the rules or the guidance as we were trying to implement in Number 10.
Okay, the next Prime Minister's question was on the 8th of December, a week later. I think it probably would have been fair to say that you would have guessed that the topic would have been brought up again by the Leader of the Opposition, because the previous evening ITV had published a video of a mock press conference where number 10 staff were seemingly joking about the gatherings on the 18th of December. At PMQs on the 8th of December, you were asked if there was a party in number 10 on the 13th of November, and you told the House the guidance was followed and the rules were followed in Downing Street at all times. By the 8th of December, it had been a full week since you were first asked in the House about gatherings in number 10. The issue had continued to feature on the front page of many of the newspapers and, as we later saw on the television. What did you do in that week to prepare for any further questions about gatherings, to decide whether you needed to correct your previous statement that the guidance had been followed and whether you should reaffirm it?
Well, I did, as the committee knows, I did the most obvious thing, which was when the Allegra video emerged on the evening of, I think, the 7th of December, I decided that I was getting conflicting information about what had happened at this gathering on the 18th of December. I was troubled by that. I hadn't been at the thing. I was relying on what I thought were the honest and well-intentioned descriptions of this from my trusted advisors, but clearly there was a difference of opinion. So I commissioned the Cabinet Secretary to conduct an inquiry. That's the most important thing that I did.
By the end of that Prime Minister's questions on the 8th of December, you've been asked, I think, multiple times about the issue of gatherings in Downing Street, but at no point did you tell the House that you knew that there had been gatherings that you had attended, in particular the 5 we've raised with you. Why did you fail to tell the House on the 8th of December that there were gatherings that you'd attended?
But Mr. Carter, you've got to understand that in my mind at the time, these did not seem to me to be improper or offensive events. So they weren't in my consciousness because
you thought they were
I thought they were work events. As I said to the House when we came to discuss the May 20th event, and I came to the House to explain, I made it very clear that I thought that was a work event, and indeed I still do.
Having told the House on the 8th of December that the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times in Downing Street, you then reiterated this the following month. You told the House at Prime Minister's questions on January the 12th, I believe that the events in question were within the guidance and were within the rules. You knew what the rules and guidance were, and you personally attended at least 4 gatherings, those of the 20th of May, the 19th of June, the 13th of November, and the 14th of January 2021, for which fixed penalty notices were issued to attendees, which hadn't been compliant with the rules, and at which breaches of the rules and guidance must have been obvious to you because you were there and you saw.
So the only FPN that I received was for the event that we've been over in some detail, which was the event in the Cabinet room. And I think that even this committee, I venture to suggest, might concede that had they been in my shoes at that event, it might not have occurred even to them that this was an event that was against either the rules or the guidance. It certainly didn't occur to me. It didn't occur to the then Chancellor of the Exchequer. It didn't occur to the Media Department. We briefed it out. That was the only event for which I received an FPN. All the other events, for the period I was there, I can only conclude were deemed by the Met to be not rule-breaking events, because I wasn't issued with an FPN. Therefore, you have 2 sets of events. The one for which I received an FPN, which boggled my mind because I couldn't understand why I got it, and the others where I wasn't aware of rule-breaking at the time and believed we were following the guidance. So there was nothing I could say to the House on that score.
If you turn to page 61 of the evidence bundle, you can see a statement there from the then Principal Private Secretary Martin Reynolds, in which he says that he directly questioned with you whether it was realistic to argue that guidance had been followed at all times in number 10. Do you accept that you were advised not to say guidance was followed at all times in number 10, and yet you told the House that it was on the 8th of December and the 12th of January?
No, so there's a couple of important points. it is absolutely true that Martin Reynolds was cautious about what I should say in the House on the 8th of December, because we'd already begun the process of the inquiry. We were looking at the December the 18th event. I had received assurances about the rules on December the 18th, but I hadn't received assurances about the guidance. What Martin was trying to get at, if you look at his what he says, it's clear. He's talking about social distancing and whether it was whether we had maintained social distancing within number 10, and whether that would be whether we had maintained perfect social distancing within number 10. And if you look at paragraph, hang on a second. Martin makes it clear that he thinks that the nature of the working environment in number 10 might make it difficult to claim that full social distancing was observed. So, forgive me, Chair.
Just suspend while the bell's ringing. We don't need to vote, but sorry,
okay.
continue.
Can I just,
it's
a very, very important point, because this goes to the heart of, I think, the confusion. And what we're in his comments to me, Martin is talking about whether or not we observed perfect social distancing. He is not saying that we did not observe the guidance. And I can prove that if you just reflect for a second on what it would mean if he had said that throughout the pandemic we were not observing the guidance. He didn't mean that. He and I were responsible for making sure that we were observing the guidance to the best of our ability. If you'd asked Simon Case or any of the senior officials, were we following or put it the other way around, were you flouting the guidance in number 10? They'd have said no. We were following the guidance, but with mitigations and with social distancing where possible, as specified in the guidance.
On reflection, and given that Mr. Reynolds says that you agreed to delete the reference to guidance, do you wish you'd have corrected the record at that point?
No, because first of all, we'd already begun the inquiry, and I didn't know what sense the guidance had been broken. I had no evidence that anybody had broken the guidance. It wasn't clear to me what I would say to the House of Commons. Second, nobody was advising me to correct the record, and Martin and I, as I've tried to explain, we're talking about two different things. I was talking about the totality of following the guidance. He was talking about maintaining perfect social distancing. The advice that he was giving me was in relation to a statement that I was making about the December the 18th event and about the reassurances I had received. And it was true to say that I'd received reassurances about that event as far as the rules went, but it was also true to say that nobody had explicitly reassured me about the guidance, and he thought it prudent to take out the reference to the guidance. It is true, as you just said, Mr. Carter, that I then went on to, later in PMQs, to talk to Catherine West. I don't know whether I was going to come to this point, but she asked a question, and as you've said, I said that she asked a question about whether there had been a party on November the 13th. I said no, but I was sure that the rules and guidance had been observed. I said no, but whatever happened, I was sure that the rules and guidance had been observed at all times. And I said that with confidence because I knew about the events she was talking about on November the 13th and had my own personal reasons to believe that that was true.
In your written statement to us, paragraph 81.2, you say you don't believe that perfect compliance with social distancing was required by the guidance. If you believe this, why did you not make it clear when you told the House that the guidance was followed at all times?
Well, that's a very good question, Mr. Carter, and perhaps it would have been, perhaps it would have, as I think Sir Bernard said earlier on, perhaps if I'd elucidated more clearly what I meant and what I felt and believed about following the guidance, that would have helped.
Probably final question. Paragraph 28 of your submission. You quote an excerpt from the workplace guidance which says, where the social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full in relation to a particular activity, business should consider whether that activity needs to continue for the business to operate. And if so, take all the mitigating actions possible to reduce the risk of transmission. Are you saying you thought these gatherings were so critical to the function of government that it was permissible to hold them even if they couldn't be socially distanced?
The short answer is yes. I thought that it was essential to thank staff for their work. I think that even though the pictures seem to show festive events, I think that our efforts, even in those pictures, are being made to do social distancing. And what I saw, what I had in my head when I was talking to the House of Commons was a memory, a strong memory of people over a long period doing everything they could to stop the spread of disease within the building.
And just so we're clear, at those events in the vestibule, the first pictures we saw, what mitigations were put in place that were required by the guidance?
So I've listed some of them, but we avoided physical contact. We didn't, for instance, as the guidance says, we didn't touch each other's pens. We didn't pass stuff to each other if we could possibly avoid it. We kept. Though not every, I would not wish to say that was perfectly implemented.
Presumably, people were passing drinks to each other because we've seen the picture.
Of course, and I'm not. And this is guidance. This is guidance, and I'm not going to pretend that it was enforced rigidly. But that's explicitly what the guidance provides for. We had Zoom meetings. We had a great reduction in the numbers of people in the building overall. We had signs telling you which way to walk. We had perspex screens. And I've mentioned all this before, but it really is worth going over again because
is asking you about that specific event.
When you see the photographs,
the December the 18th event.
When you see the photographs in the vestibule, none of those mitigations seem to be evident.
Yes, because so which event are you talking about, Mr. Carter?
So the first photographs that we saw...
Yes, okay, the November the 30th, the Lee Kane event. Yes, and that is because that was the space where people congregated fast. If I wanted to get a message out, it was the natural place to do it. Yes, you don't see... you don't see... perspex screens there, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't sanitizer and efforts to restrict the spread of COVID.
Final question for me.
And just as just in all of this, bear in mind that we believed, Martin Reynolds believed, everybody responsible for the health of the building and the health of employees in the building believed that the guidance was being very considerably augmented in a way that went beyond the guidance by the testing regime that I've described.
I don't think any members of this committee don't recognise the challenges that you were facing, the team were facing in Downing Street, and the steps that were being put in place to try and keep people safe. I do, though, want to just finish, if I may, with the comment that you made to the House on the 12th of January, that you believed implicitly that the gatherings of the 20th of May, which you attended, had been a work event. That was the event in the garden. I mean, it was termed in the press the Bring Your Own Booze. It was a garden party. Many are suggesting that was clearly not essential for work purposes and therefore in breach of the COVID rules at the time. Why did you say that to the House?
Because I implicitly believe that it was a work event. And as I said to the committee just now, I was ushered out into the garden, having been briefed shortly beforehand about what the event entailed. I met and thanked various groups of people who had been working on COVID. You see the numbers are calculated at between 10 and 30 or 40. I couldn't say exactly how many were there, but it was, I thought, an appropriate use of the garden. I felt it was an obvious work event. But what I said to Sue Gray afterwards, if we can mention Sue Gray, can we, Chair? What I said to Sue Gray was that when I looked back at that event, and this is what I said to, is why I said what I said to the House. I tried to put myself in the place of somebody, a member of the public, looking over the garden wall and seeing that, and I had to accept that even though it was, I believe, within the guidance and within the rules, I have to accept that members of the public looking at it would have thought, that looks to me like something that he's not allowing us to do. And I felt that very keenly. In retrospect, I didn't feel it at the time. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
I understand that. Can I ask you one further question? I think probably all MPs that have been on days where we're very busy going from meeting to meeting rely on our advisors to guide us through where we're going. I understand what you said about that as the Prime Minister working on a busy schedule. Did you at any point question any of the events that you were going to when the advisors were taking you to them?
Look, hindsight's a wonderful thing. In retrospect, I might have thought about some things, post Sue Gray, post the beginning of the coming to light of everything that did come to light. I have thought about it, but no, at the time, I thought we were working. And that is what, I promise you, that is what officials in Number 10 thought they were doing as well.
Thank you very much, Mr Johnson.
Can we now turn to the issue of the assurances that you mentioned to the House on numerous occasions, and I'd like to ask Alberto Costa to ask you the committee's questions on the issue of the assurances.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr Johnson. Thank you very much for coming before this important inquiry. I'm very grateful. Could I invite the team to place up slide number 8, please? Mr Johnson, as we've just seen on the screen, on the 8th of December 2021, in your opening remarks at Prime Minister's questions, you told the House that, and I quote, "I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken." In response to subsequent questions, you said that, quote, "I've been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken." And again, quote, "I've been repeatedly assured that no rules were broken." Now, these quotes which are on screen are also at pages 64 to 65 of your evidence bundle.
Thank you.
Mr Johnson, may I ask, did any government law officer or any member of the government legal department, such as the Attorney General, Solicitor General, or any one of the hundreds of solicitors and barristers that work for the government, did any one of those give you the assurance?
Thank you very much, Mr Costa. Well, no, the short answer is no, they didn't, but nor did I seek assurances from them, nor did I claim that I had. I don't think I claimed at any stage that I'd received assurances from law officers or legal representatives. The people that I said, the people who had given me the assurances, there were more than one, and it was indeed on more than one occasion. And so, would it be helpful if I told you why I said I was repeatedly assured?
Mr Costa ask his questions and then just follow the course of his questioning, if you would.
Very interested to hear, of course, your full responses. Can I ask, did the head of the civil service, Simon Case, or any other career senior permanent civil servant give you these assurances?
Well, it follows from I think from Martin Reynolds' evidence that he thought that the rules had not been broken. If you look at what he has to say, I don't remember being specifically assured by any senior civil servant about the rules or the guidance within Number 10. But the interesting thing is that, to the contrary, nobody gave me any contrary.
We'll come to that in a moment, if we may. Thank you. In paragraph 90 of your very helpful written submission, you say that the assurances were given to you by Jack Doyle and James Slack.
That's right.
Their statements confirming this are on pages 70, 72 and 75 of your evidence bundle.
Yeah.
Now, they are both individuals you had personally appointed to the position of Director of Communications at Number 10. They were political advisors who dealt with the media. Why did you rely on an assurance from political advisors rather than, as I've mentioned, a permanent civil servant, or more importantly, a government lawyer?
So here's the simple answer is that when I needed to discover what had happened, or whether the rules were broken, I went first, of course, or I asked first the senior advisor who was there, and that was Jack Doyle. The following week, you can see that Jack Doyle says that he confirms that he says in a WhatsApp to me, you can say, I've been assured that there was no party and no rules were broken. So he says that again to me. I also then rang James Slack, and both Jack and James Slack are people I have the utmost regard for, and I believe they would be completely straight with me about what had happened. And they both said that the rules had not been broken. And the reason I didn't ask a lawyer or another senior civil servant is because they were the people who'd been there.
Yes.
And they were the direct. They could give a view about the legality of that event that I didn't think a non-eyewitness would be able to do.
Okay. Well, when you decided to rely on the assurances that you've referred to in the House, why did you not then discuss the assurance with the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, or your Principal Private Secretary Martin Reynolds, or a government lawyer, at the point at which you'd been given the assurance by the individuals that you've questioned? Why didn't you double check it with a government lawyer?
First of all, Martin Reynolds, in addition to being my Principal Private Secretary, is a lawyer, and his view of all the events, as you'll see from his evidence, is that he believes that we followed the rules at all times, and that was certainly what he said to me. You'll see evidence, Mr. Costa, from my submission that at least a couple of MP colleagues remember from the morning meeting that I asked generally, did we follow the rules, were there parties, and the view of the assembled civil servants and advisors was that no, we hadn't broken the rules, and that's what they said.
The MPs that you're referring to are the ones at paragraph 90 of your written submission, where you state that the evidence given to us by Sarah Dines MP and Andrew Griffith MP saying officials gave you assurances at your daily office meetings. Those are the additional assurances that you're referring to?
Yes, and it's not clear what date that Sarah and Andrew remember, but they certainly remember me receiving those assurances. And don't forget, if I could just make an important point, from the 7th from the 7th of December onwards, the inquiry is underway. So you ask why I didn't ask Simon Case. I did ask Simon Case. I asked Simon Case to conduct an inquiry.
Well, I'm very grateful that you recall Sarah Dines MP and Andrew Griffith MP giving you the assurances, but you were present at those meetings where those two MPs said that assurances had been given. So if I just may ask the question, and you can correct me if I've misunderstood the point, who were the officials who gave these assurances in these meetings that you've referred to at paragraph 90 in your written submissions?
Well, I can't name these
name
officials.
Me one.
I don't know if I can. I think that.
Why not?
I think that most of them have indicated they don't want themselves to be
you can't remember their names, or
to
because
be named.
You don't want to breach their anonymity. Mr. Johnson, could you just pause and answer my question? Are you not naming these officials who you say were giving you these assurances because you can't remember who they were, or you can't remember their names, or because you don't want to name them because of confidentiality?
There's at least one advisor that I can think of that who was asked not to be named, and she would have been in the morning meeting, and I don't want to.
Well, could you follow that up in writing through your lawyers to the inquiry, confirming the name of the individual that you recall gave you the assurance that the meetings referred to by these two entities?
If I may say so, Mr. Costa, I don't quite follow the direction of your questions, because it's clear from what I've said that I was assured assured repeatedly by different people and on different occasions that the rules have been followed.
Well, and we're trying to ascertain who these individuals were, so it'd be very helpful if you could follow up with the individual that you've just referred to. Now, could I ask the team to place slide 9 on the screens, please? Now, slide 9 refers to a comment made by Mr. Doyle, and that will also be found at page 74 of the bundle. Mr. Doyle is asked a question: was there a discussion in this meeting, the meeting of the 8th of December 2021, whether COVID guidance was adhered to at all times? And Mr. Doyle states, quote, "I did not advise the Prime Minister to say this, no." So Mr. Doyle says he did not discuss with you whether any gatherings had been compliant with COVID guidance. Is it correct that you received no assurances that the gathering of 18th December 2020 or any other gatherings were compliant with COVID guidance?
Yes,
as opposed to the rules?
It's correct to say that I did not, as far as I can remember. I didn't receive direct assurances about the December the 18th event, about the guidance. But until Martin Reynolds made his point to me on the morning of the 8th, nobody had said to me anything adverse about our following of the guidance. And it was my impression, from what we were doing, from my lived experience in Number 10, that we were.
I'd like to ascertain about assurances that have been given. So
I'm giving you the answer.
So let me carry on, if I may, Mr. Johnson. Can I ask you to turn to pages 70 and 73 of your evidence bundle, and you'll see excerpts from Mr. Doyle's signed witness submission. Now, Mr. Doyle says, and I quote, "The lines that were drafted for the Mirror," that's the Daily Mirror, "became the basis of Mr. Johnson's lines to take in Prime Minister's questions on the 1st of December 2021, end quote. He also says, in relation to a conversation he had with you on the 30th of November, quote, "I said that we have had an inquiry from the Daily Mirror. He said, 'What is our line?'" End quote. Page 76 of your evidence bundle shows the line sent to the Mirror was, quote, "COVID rules were followed at all times," end quote. So that line, Mr. Johnson, the assurance that you relied on in the House of Commons on the 8th of December, was initially developed as no more than a media line to hold at bay press inquiries, wasn't it?
Yes, but I don't see any great vice in that. And I think we have to be absolutely realistic about how government is carried on. And if a minister cannot rely on the advice of senior and trusted officials when you have to get a huge amount of business done, then it would be impossible for government to carry on.
Could I ask you to, you've acknowledged that it was developed as a media line to hold at bay the press inquiries. So I think we need to hear from Mr. Costa his next question.
Thank you, Chair. It is the case, isn't it, that Jack Doyle, the person whose purported assurance you sought to rely on, was himself doubtful about the compliance of some of these gatherings with the rules and guidance. Now, Mr. Johnson...
I don't know whence do you derive that?
I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. If you turn to page 79 of your evidence bundle...
Saying he said this at the time?
If you turn to page 79 of your evidence bundle, you will see a selection of WhatsApp messages sent by Mr. Doyle. These messages are discussing the gathering of the 19th of June 2020 that marked your birthday. Mr. Doyle says that he was, and I quote, struggling to come up with a way, that the gathering was in the rules, and that he was, quote, not sure it would, quote, work to suggest it was reasonably necessary for work purposes. Were you aware, Mr. Johnson, that your trusted senior advisor, as you've put it, Mr. Doyle, doubted whether this gathering was within the rules?
So, no is the answer to that question. I wasn't aware that he'd sent that WhatsApp. He didn't send it to me. This was, I think, on January the 25th, which is long after we've started the process which was to become the Sue Gray. I think the Sue Gray inquiry was already well underway. A couple of other quick points, if I may, on that WhatsApp. Jack was not at that event on the 19th of June 2020. He knew nothing about what had actually taken place. He was then relying on media descriptions of that event, which had subsequently emerged. And yes, he sent a message to someone else saying he needed to work out what the justification was. But just to go back to the June the 19th event, 2020, which we've been over several times, at the time I thought it was so innocent that it was actually briefed out to the Times.
I appreciate that, but I'm talking about assurances you were given, so let me focus again. So how can it be that Mr. Doyle, and this is the point I think is important for the inquiry to understand, how can it be that Mr. Doyle, one of your principal advisors, your trusted advisor, the person whose assurance you relied on in the House of Commons, was himself clearly doubtful about the compliance of this gathering with the rules, but you continue to say that you were not? How can that be?
He wasn't at that event. He was struggling to contend with media accounts of it long after that event and after the Sue Gray inquiry had already begun. And above all, he did not, even at that time, let alone before I stood up in the House of Commons, raise with me any concerns that he might have had about that event.
Thank you.
Even if he knew about it.
I'm almost finished, Mr. Johnson. Why did you tell the House of Commons that you had received repeated assurances that no rules had been broken when you knew that that was not the case, because you knew what the rules were? You were at gatherings that breached the rules, and the breaches of the rules would have been obvious to you at the time. Isn't that the case?
No, sorry.
Let me complete the question, if you may.
Some might see your reliance on the purported assurances you received as, and forgive me, as a deflection mechanism to prevent having to answer questions about your knowledge of these gatherings. Would that not be a fair assessment?
No, it would be a completely ridiculous assessment. I said in the Commons on the 8th of December that I'd been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that no rules were broken. I was referring to the December the 18th event, December the 18th event of the previous year of 2020. I had the assurances that I had received about that event were from people that I had the utmost respect for and who were directly relevant to my understanding of what that event consisted of. It was entirely sensible to talk both to Jack and then Jack Doyle and then to James Slack to find out, to get their honest take about what had happened. And my impression on the 30th of November 2020 from what Jack was telling me was that it sounded like it was in accordance with the rules. It sounded like it was necessary for work purposes, but also it sounded from what he was saying that it was in accordance with the guidance. When that turned out, following the Allegra video to be in question, I commissioned Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, to conduct an inquiry. So by the time and if you look at that statement, I say I've been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that the rules were followed, but I have asked Simon Case to investigate. So for the purposes of the House, my statement it should be seen for the purposes of the business of the House, that statement should be seen in the context of the investigation, the inquiry that I have just launched, in which in the same PMQs I say I'm going to make sure that the findings are placed in the library of the House of Commons.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for answering my questions this afternoon. Thank you, Mr Johnson.
Could I just put a point to you? Because I, along with my colleagues, was in the House at the time when these assurances were given. And we took them to be serious assurances. You told the House you'd received assurances. Would you not expect us to be a bit dismayed to hear that it was not from the senior civil servants, it was from political appointees, that they themselves had doubts about it, that it only covered one gathering, it didn't cover the other three, and it only covered the rules, it didn't cover the guidance? I think if you'd have said that to us in the House, and also you were there at the time, so it's a bit hard to understand.
Sorry.
Could you let me finish my point? You were there at the time, so it's a bit hard to understand what the nature of an assurance is when you have been there and seen it with your own eyes. I mean, if I was going at 100 miles an hour and I saw the speedometer saying 100 miles an hour, it would be a bit odd, wouldn't it, if I said somebody assured me that I wasn't, because it's what you've seen with your own eyes.
Yeah, with great
so
respect.
do you actually think that we would be entitled to be a bit dismayed about the flimsy nature of this assurance when we took it at face value that these assurances amounted to something, and it looks from what you've told us in answer to Mr Costa's questions that they did not amount to much at all?
No, so first of all, I think, great respect, Chair, if you're talking about the December the 18th, 2020 event, I don't know, there's some confusion. I was not there.
That's one of the three.
I was not there.
You were there.
And if you look at the statement that I made in the House of Commons, and because this was the relevant issue, because the Allegra video related to the December the 18th event, the Leader of the Opposition's questions the previous week related to the December the 18th event, I was answering about the December the 18th event, because that was the matter in question. I had received, as I said, repeated assurances by different people at more than one occasion and more than one person that the event was in accordance with the rules. And I had that both from, as I said, Jack Doyle and James Slack. Now, the question that I think the committee is trying to unpick is that a good enough assurance? Is it good enough to rely on the Director of Communications and the former Director of Communications about one event, no matter how eminent they may be? And I think the answer is yes.
He himself had doubts.
I think, no, sorry, forgive me. He offered, that's not correct, Chair. The Director of Communications, Jack Doyle, did not say at the time that he briefed me about the December the 18th event that he had doubts about whether the guidance was followed.
He did have doubts. Can I just
ask... Sorry, where's your evidence for that?
It's in the WhatsApp. Sir Bernard is going to continue this question.
Sorry, can I just say, he did not express those doubts to me. He did not express those doubts to me.
He had doubts. The person whose assurances you were relying on only gave assurances in relation to one gathering, not the others. Only gave assurances of the rules, not about COVID. It was a line.
Chair, I was being asked about the one gathering. The Leader of the Opposition, you played his clip just now. That was, everybody saw it. He was asking about, he said, was there a party in which loads of people came to a Christmas party in Downing Street last year? That was the question. That was then, when I said that the guidance was followed completely at all times, that was then called into question by what Allegra Stratton had to say. So we immediately instituted the inquiry by Simon Case, but that remained the point at issue. The point at issue was what had happened on December the 18th. And really, if the committee is going to say that I can't rely on the advice of senior people like Jack Doyle and James Slack, who had the advantage of actually being there, then it's really going to make it very difficult for government to be carried on.
Mr Johnson, just 2 points arising from, when you're ready, 2 points arising from the recent questions and answers. First of all, on the question of Sarah Dine's statement of evidence, where she mentions that either on the 1st of December or the 8th of December, she recalls you asking, we did follow the rules at all times, didn't we? And this is in your paragraph 90 of your submission. And I recall more than one person in the room said, yes, of course. And she says, I'm not certain who the people were, but I quote, I'm 90% sure one of them was Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary. The difficulty we have with that evidence is in the sworn statement from Simon Case, which I'm afraid is not in the call bundle, but it's on page 33. It's on 791 and 792 of the general bundle, and don't waste time fumbling for it because I will explain. He's asked about both these meetings, and he makes it clear that there was no was there discussion in the meeting of the following points, and if so, what were the details of that discussion? He says, I do not believe any of these topics were discussed at the meeting. And he's asked a general question on 793, are you aware of any other meeting where Mr. Johnson was present where the points listed in parts E and F were discussed, and that's whether there was any discussion about compliance with the guidance and the rules? And he says no. So we have a difficulty giving any credibility to the evidence we've received from Sarah Dines, albeit I'm sure she gave that evidence in good faith. Then there's the question of your reliance on... I mean, have you got anything to say about that? I should give you the opportunity.
Well, I think if you're going to question her evidence, then you need to hear it from her. I can't comment on her. I can't comment on her evidence. I can't comment on what Simon Case has said. What I do remember are general affirmation from colleagues that it was the line I was about to use in PMQs that about the rules being followed was supported.
But do you remember Simon Case saying?
Frankly,
yes,
I don't. But it's,
I'm not questioning.
But you should ask him.
I'm not questioning the veracity.
We're asking you because you were there.
I'm not questioning the veracity of her statement as she believes it, because she is quite open. She says she's only 90% sure. She's not sure.
But I wasn't relying for what I said on the Cabinet Secretary.
If you think it's terribly important that we interrogate Sarah Dines, we will consider.
No, I don't think. I don't. I think it's probably totally irrelevant. I think that the key point is that when I said that I'd had repeated assurances, I was not. I never claimed that I had one of those people giving me those assurances was Simon Case.
Okay, but there's another more general point. You say, I see no great vice in that. That is relying on the assurance of Mr. Doyle, who was an appointed political advisor, not a professional civil servant, not an impartial...
Like Sue Gray.
Well, we're not relying on Sue Gray's evidence in this inquiry. The obligation not to mislead Parliament is a very serious obligation on any member of Parliament, let alone a minister. And it requires the MP or the minister to take due care, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes. So I have to say, if I was accused of law breaking and I had to give undertakings to the House of Commons, of all places, that I had not broken the law, I would want the advice of a lawyer. I would want the advice of somebody really independent and capable, and you didn't ask the Cabinet Secretary.
Can I interrupt you for 10 seconds?
Yes?
I wasn't accused of law breaking. I was asked to say what had gone on at a party or an event in the media room on the 18th of December 2020.
If I was asked to give undertakings that rules and guidance had been followed, and there was any doubt about it, there was the most thinnest scintilla of doubt about it, well, you'd want to copper plate your assurances by showing that you'd taken proper advice. I put it to you, Mr. Johnson, you did not take proper advice.
Can I respond first by saying that if you look at what I said on December the 1st, you have to. It is true, as Mr. Carter said, that I had expected something like that question to come up, but actually, I thought that the Leader of the Opposition would not bother with that story
Okay,
for his main line of
that's
presence.
irrelevant.
It is relevant.
The
because
question is, why did you not take proper advice?
Sorry. The answer is quite simply that over the, and I've tried to describe what I felt about these events as they were happening. Nobody raised with me or had any concern before I stood up on December the 1st about those events.
You did not ask.
I did say, this is complete nonsense. I mean, complete nonsense. I asked the relevant people. They were senior people. They'd been working very hard. They gave Jack Doyle gave me a clear account of what had happened.
The Cabinet Secretary.
How the Cabinet Secretary wasn't there? Sorry, you're wrong, because I did ask the Cabinet Secretary. And I did ask the Cabinet Secretary to conduct an inquiry on the 7th of December.
Not about whether your undertakings to the House of Commons were correct.
But of course that was what he was...
We can move on.
Can we turn to Charles Walker for our next questions?
Sorry, there's some noises coming from the back of the room. Is that stopped? Okay. Mr. Johnson, housekeeping matters. You're a parliamentarian, I'm a parliamentarian, so we do have a duty to Parliament. There's been a lot of noises of hue and cry about the legitimacy of this inquiry, which I do think we need to address. You sort of alluded to it in your opening statement. I'll just give you an example of an organisation that claims to have your interests at heart. It's called Conservative Post. In a recent article published on its website on the 12th of March, it stated, this was the headline, revealed the Privileges Committee's Great British Stitch-Up of Boris. And the sentences, so when Labour proposed referring Boris Johnson to the Privileges Committee for misleading Parliament, many Conservative MPs didn't oppose it. Now, I just want to park that for a second and take you back about 11 months before that. On the 21st of April, when your case was referred to the Privileges Committee, the government minister, the Right Honourable Michael Ellis QC, the then Minister for the Cabinet Office and Paymaster General, said the following in winding up. The government recognised the seriousness of the issue under consideration. Let me say at the outset that the Prime Minister has always been clear that he is happy to face whatever inquiries Parliament sees fit to hold. He is happy for the House to decide how it wishes to proceed today. And this is important because at the end of that, the motion was put and there was no vote. And that is a matter of fact. Indeed, there wasn't even a cry of object from anyone. Can you accept that was the case?
Yes, I encourage people to support it.
So it is actually misleading of Conservative Post to say many Conservative MPs didn't oppose it. The truth is, not a single Conservative MP opposed it.
Yes, that's completely correct.
That's great. No, this is really good. This is good. We're making progress. In your opening statement, you referred to the chair, the appointment of the chair. You suggest, to some extent, that you had concerns, but you were willing to set those concerns aside. On the 14th of June 2022, the Right Honourable Lady for Camberwell and Peckham, there was a motion to add her to the committee on the 14th of June 2022. And it went through at the end of a debate on the privatisation of Channel 4, and there were colleagues of ours in the chamber. And when the motion was put and the Right Honourable Lady's name was mentioned, there was not a single cry of object, not one, not even from a little mouse scuttling across the floor, not a single cry of object on the 14th of June. Can you accept that as well?
Of course.
So if these concerns were live about the committee and our legitimacy or the legitimacy of the chair, somebody might have shouted object.
Listen, okay. Sir Charles, can I just come back quickly on this point. My anxieties about fairness are contained in my submission. I've said what I've had to say about the previous remarks of the chair, and I've said what I had to say about my belief in the ability of this committee, which is a very important and distinguished committee, to be impartial.
Which were made before her appointment on the 14th of June.
And I have come before you this afternoon in full confidence that you will be impartial and that you will look at the evidence and that you will conclude that I did not wittingly or recklessly mislead Parliament. There's not a shred of evidence to suggest that I did. And I hope that you will exonerate me, and I think you should exonerate me, of any contempt whatever.
So look, we received your evidence bundle, which was really well put together. It's been a long afternoon. We've shared the talking. You've had to do it on your own. So thank you for answering our questions. But it is a well put together bundle. I just feel that the way things have been conducted is that your supporters, I'm not saying you, I'm saying your supporters seem to want it both ways. They're hoping that the evidence you've given in 52 pages will exonerate you, give you a clean bill of health. That's what your desired outcome is. But just in case that doesn't happen, there has been a concerted effort to delegitimise the committee, to call us a kangaroo court. Have you characterised us as a kangaroo court?
You can tell by my presence this afternoon, by the seriousness with which I've taken your questions, by my attempts to answer in detail the points you've put to me, how seriously I take you and your committee, the respect I have for this institution of Parliament, and for better or worse, whatever the issues of fairness that I may have raised in my submission, this is the body that decides on standards and privileges. This is the committee that does it. There's no other way of doing it. That's why I have come here, out of respect for the committee, out of respect for Parliament, and because I do not believe that you can conceivably find me guilty of wittingly misleading Parliament on the basis of the evidence that you have assembled.
So as a parliamentarian, do you regret that colleagues of ours, who are also parliamentarians, have called the Privileges Committee a kangaroo court?
I don't want anybody to cause any colleague any. There should be no intimidation, or there should be no attempt to bully any colleague in any matter whatever.
Or is that a yes or a no?
Yes.
But you regret that they.
Sorry, I'm not.
Because I regret it.
I'm not.
As a parliamentarian, do you regret it?
My questions of fairness are well documented in my submission. I think that I deprecate the term that you've just used. I don't want to repeat it, but I think the people will judge for themselves on the basis of the evidence that you have produced on the fairness of this committee. I have every confidence that you will show that you can be fair.
Okay, I'm nearly done.
Can I just interject, if I may, Chair? Will you accept that this committee can be fair and wrong, rather than being unfair and a witch hunt?
I certainly think that. Let me put it this way, Mr. Costa. I think if this committee were to find me in contempt of Parliament, having come and done something so utterly insane and contrary to my beliefs and my principles, is to come to Parliament and wittingly lie, I think that would be not only unfair, I think it would be wrong.
But you wouldn't categorise it as a witch hunt or a kangaroo court. That's the point I'm asking.
I think I will wait to see how you proceed with the evidence that you have. But I do not wish to. I will study your conclusions from the evidence. I deprecate the terms that you have used. I don't want to see good colleagues feeling that they're under pressure. Either way, I believe that if you study this evidence impartially, you will come to the conclusion that I've given.
Nearly done. On the 25th of May, you described number 10, and here are the speech marks, a building that is 5,300 metres square across 5 floors, excluding the flats, Hundreds of staff are entitled to work there. And I'm really sorry, I think this is probably the last time you're going to be taken back to these dates. On the 1st of December, you will be well aware that you said to the Leader of the Opposition all guidance was followed completely in number 10. On the 8th of December, again to the Leader of the Opposition, you said, I have been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken, and then I'll rattle through this quickly. On the 8th of December to Catherine West, regarding 13th of November alleged party, I'm sure whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times. You received assurances from a number of people. I suppose the question I've got is how on earth would they have known that the rules were being followed at all time? It is impossible because you didn't have cameras in every room.
No. I mean, but I had their pairs of eyes. Yep. So you're right. So I didn't have omniscience about what was going on in the building, and I had to rely on what people told me. You're completely right, Sir Charles. But what they had to say was extremely valuable, and they were extremely reputable people, and are extremely reputable people. And they gave a description of that event, and to get back to the point that the chair was raising, initially it was one event that was under consideration, under discussion, and I took my cue from them.
So I want to say this because you worked incredibly hard. I accept you worked incredibly hard. I accept your officials worked incredibly hard. I accept that you were hospitalised. We got the vaccines out. You worked incredibly hard. I suppose what I'm left with, and I'm not sure if this helps or hinders your case, is when you look at 126 fixed penalty notices handed out to number 10, it is clear that Simon Case, Martin Reynolds, Jack Doyle, Lee Kane, James Slack, all of them really had no idea what was going on, because if they had, it is highly unlikely 126 fixed penalty notices would have been handed out.
And can I just say, Sir Charles, that you put your finger on the crucial point, because if the committee thinks that I must have known, or to get back to the conversation we've had, the doctrine of obviousness, if it was obvious to me, then it would have been obvious to those other senior and distinguished people. It really wasn't. And I was very shocked to get my own FPN, and amazed, frankly, by the number of other FPNs. Clearly what happened, if we don't want to go over it again, we don't want to reinvestigate, but I think what happened basically was that on a few evenings, events did simply go on far too long. And I can't apologise for that enough, but we are where we are.
So I don't want to try your patience, because you have been here a long time. If not deliberate, is it possible that it was reckless or slightly reckless not to have caveated your statements to the House with, to the best of my knowledge, or I really do hope it was the certainty of the statement. So, Is it possible to accept that actually there was a degree of recklessness?
No, I mean nobody wants to be in a position where they're misleading that. Nobody wants to say something to the House of Commons that is going to turn out not to be true, especially something as readily falsifiable as the guidance was followed completely. It was my belief that was the case. I have apologised, and I continue to apologise for inadvertently misleading the House, and I hope the committee understands that. But it was not deliberate. It was based on my genuine understanding and belief about what we were doing, what we had been doing for a long time. And I think that your point just now was one of the most important ones in this whole business. It wasn't obvious to me that there were problems with some events, and it wasn't obvious to the other senior people that you've described.
Thank you. I just want to finally explore the question of the correcting the record issue, because there's been a lot of discussion about you having corrected the record, and I just want to explore one aspect of that and put this to you. What you said on the 25th of May 2022, you said, I'm happy to set on the record now that when I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance had been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. And you've said that to us this afternoon. You then go on to say, it was certainly the case that when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell. So what you said to the House, by way of a purported correction, was that it was certainly the case when you were present at gatherings to wish staff farewell that the guidance had been followed at all times. Do you want to reassert that, or do you want to correct the record and acknowledge here that actually the guidance was not followed at all times, just so we're clear, because you can correct the record to this committee.
So what I want to say is, first of all, that the rules were followed, and that's for my period at those events, and that's clear from the FPN.
It was certainly the case,
and it was my belief at the time that I made those statements that the guidance was followed, and actually, Chair, it remains my belief. For the time I was there, when I was looking at these events, I thought they were within the guidance, given what I knew about what we were trying to do, given what I knew about the limitations we faced on maintaining perfect social distancing.
Now about what your belief is now.
So what I don't wish to dissent from what I said on May the 25th.
Well, May the 25th was 5 months after this had first been raised, and you'd had time to consider all the issues that were being raised, and even further time has elapsed till here we are now. And there's a lot of evidence that's been produced and you've had the opportunity to consider. Do you still want to assert that it was certainly the case when you were present at gatherings to wish staff farewell that the guidance had been followed at all times? Do you want to assert that to this committee?
I do. And what I want to make, I do. And because I see no reason to withdraw what I said on May the 25th. Because at that stage, on May the 25th, I was in possession of, and I think the committee in possibly the world was in possession of all the material that we've looked at today. My view remains that the guidance allowed for social distancing not to be carried out with rigid drill sergeant precision, particularly in difficult circumstances such as the ones in which we were operating, provided you had mitigations.
Okay,
and so that was my belief, and it remains.
You're sticking with that point, and you don't wish to make a correction of the record. Thank you. That concludes our questions. Are there any final points that you haven't already mentioned? Not ones that you have mentioned, but ones which you would like to mention which haven't come up in our questions. We'd like to give you the opportunity to make those points.
Thank you very much. I've much enjoyed our discussion. Well, I think it's been I genuinely think it's been a useful discussion, and I hope it's clear to the committee what was in my heart and my mind on December the 1st and December the 8th of 2021.
And May the 25th and numerous other occasions.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. The committee will consider the evidence you've given us alongside the other evidence we've reviewed in the course of our inquiries. We may take further written and or oral evidence before the end of our inquiry and before we reach our final conclusions, if we deem that necessary, and we've already discussed the possibility of that. But for now, that concludes our session today. Order, order.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding